Chapter 51 Claim to the Throne. You are listening at novelfull.audio. We need to finish up the reflectors right away. I can't know what my brothers have planned for the banquet, but I guarantee you will need these by tonight. After he had spent the night at the Cicada mansion, Corco had gone on a shopping spree in the outer city all morning. After all, tonight's banquet promised nothing but trouble, and he needed to prepare for all eventualities. If nothing else, the prince could at least guess a few hurdles his brothers might make him jump on his return. Of course, he could not prepare for everything, especially not with what little time they had left him with. Since the evening banquet would, in true Medalla fashion, actually start around noon and run long into the night, he would have to delegate the work he couldn't finish up before. Of course, he had already decided to keep Fidelio out of the line of fire, so his attendant would be in charge of the final preparations. However, as they turned into the Cicada mansion's courtyard, he realized that even his remaining time would be cut short. A surprise guest had appeared at his uncle's mansion, one who would take up all of his attention. Grandfather. A smile all over his face, Corco ran towards the old man who had waited for them at the Cicada mansion's entrance. Of course, Elder Caelestis Viribus Pluritac looked nothing like an old man. Despite being over 80 years old, the elder looked like a handsome man in his 50s, with his tall, upright stature and the grayed temples to accentuate his raven-black hair. Once again, Corco was reminded of the miraculous powers of the Pluritac cultivation technique. Wawalakis. I'm glad you are back safe. As Corco walked up to his grandfather, the old man addressed the prince by his childhood nickname, while he stepped up to meet his descendant half. Way. Back in Corco's youth, the elder had been the first to call him by the name, which translated to small raven in the Yakua language. Back when he had asked him, Caelestis had told Corco that he thought of the name because the crown prince had been small, dark-skinned and clever, just like the raven in the old stories. Obviously I am. How could I not be safe? Corco grinned to relieve his grandfather's worries. Please come in and have a seat. Lord Sicardu was so accommodating as to provide me with a guest room. On my trip to the Western Plains, I managed to acquire a quality tea as well. We should have a taste together. Sure, grandfather. Fidelio. Corco turned to his attendant. Yes, master. Sorry about this, but you'll have to go out to the camp and finish up our work by yourself. Oh, and get one of Uncle's messengers to tell Primus that he'll be working as my attendant today. Since you'll be indisposed and all. Yes, master. Of course, I will also inform Lord Petrocilius, Fidelio reminded his master. I doubt he would mind, but we probably should just in case. Good luck. Once he had arranged everything for the evening and freed up his schedule, Corco followed his grandfather inside. After the two Pluritacs had sat down on their chairs, two servants brought out the prepared tea and filled 2 cups. While the servants were still busy setting the table, Caelestis opened the conversation. I heard what happened 2 nights ago. How is your arm? The elder asked with a frown. Within the confines of the palace, the only people who had ever worried about Corco had been his mother, his father and his grandfather Caelestis. Unlike every other northerner, the elder had always treated him as equal to his brothers. Now that both of his parents were dead, Caelestis was the only firm ally Corco had left in his father's family. It's just a scratch. The wound should heal nicely. Corco lifted his arm to show that he was fine, although he refused to mention that he had his stitches redone just yesterday. If only I had been there. Those traitors would not dare. The old man hit the table and spilled the precious tea before they could taste it. With an awkward grin he looked down at the little puddle, before he took up the cup for his first sip of what was left of the expensive brew. Patient beyond what he would afford others, Corco waited until Caelestis had recovered his composure. Do you know who did it? The old man asked. Been investigating it yesterday, but the trail is already cold. Someone is very diligent with the cover. Up, Corco said with a sneer. A tired sigh escaped the elder in response, his face slack and tired. Ha! Maybe it is for the best. Another fight in the palace would only lead to more instability. Well, I'm not the one starting the fights. Just watch out for that farce of a banquet later on. They'll jump me like a dog in heat. In response to Corco's vitriol, Caelestis sighed again. I hoped you could get along with your brothers. This is the second reason I am here now, before the start of the banquet. Even though his grandson had always been obedient in his presence, Caelestis shifted around on his seat and turned his cup in his hand. It took a long time before he continued. These are the times we live in. Things have become so complicated that an old man cannot even visit his grandson anymore without a deeper purpose. Even though the elder had come for more than a family visit, Corco sipped his tea and waited for Caelestis to continue. Bitter and way too spicy, was his honest evaluation. First we have to make sure you won't stumble tonight. How is your wardrobe? If you want to avoid an incident, every aspect of your appearance will need to be meticulous. An ocean blue tunic and a simple blue headband. 2 simple rings. 1 coral and 1 amber. My silver triquetra necklace and silver gauntlets. We actually had to buy most of it today. I already had a tunic at least, but that one bled through, so we got a new one. Showing off his wide smile, Caelestis narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For the first time since they had sat down, the elder seemed content. Good, good. Blue to honor the dead, the rings to represent north and south, the pendant for the family, the silver for wealth and the gauntlets for might. If those estates dare to criticize your wardrobe, they will have to deal with me. Thank you, grandfather. Anything else I need to know for later? At once the elder's carefree attitude disappeared, as a frown spread over his face like dark clouds on a summer day. Pasha has prepared for a stargazing brawl. When we were at the Achilia estate, he borrowed some elite warriors from his uncle. He will most likely attempt a challenge tonight. If that's all they have prepared, then there's nothing to worry about. I'm sure I can deal with my baby brother, Corco joked. Though why were you in Wales anyways? My arrival should have been known to the palace long ago. Not that I would blame you, grandfather. It's just, he trailed off, as he raised his hands in defense. I understand, lackeys. I will have to explain before my grandson hates me, the elder said with a chuckle. Since so many warriors and lords have been collected in the capital over the past months, our granary began to run low on rice and wheat. I have been responsible for everyday governance in the Grand Court, so I had to travel to Wales and ask the Achilia people to transport more rice upstream. Although I don't like to depend on them, it was the only way to tide us over the winter. Since I have taken responsibility of the court, matters have been difficult. No way. You should have done fine, grandfather. You sat on that throne yourself, after all. In defiance of his grandfather's humble attitude, Corco smiled and offered a nod of encouragement. No matter what, the prince couldn't imagine that the former Emperor Caelestis would struggle with the day-to-day affairs of the court. I was not born to rule, I always knew that, Caelestis replied with a sad smile, even back when I was emperor. I tried my best, but my achievements were few. That is, after all, why I made way for Titu so soon. Over the past seasons, the memories of the past come back to haunt me every day. I try my hardest, but without a real emperor to sit the throne, there will only be ever more problems. The wolves smell blood, and they are closing in. Lost in thought, Caelestis looked out the window. For a while the family members traded silent sips of tea, before the elder made an outrageous request. Lackeys. I want you to give up on the throne. Grandfather, what are you saying? Dumbfounded, Corco's eyes widened as he stared at the man he considered his ally. However, by now his grandfather's eyes had firmed up. The old man had made his decision. I understand. But please hear me out, he gestured for Korko to calm down. In response, the youngster leaned back in his chair. Rather than make assumptions, he had decided to listen until the end. He owed his grandfather at least that much. Look, you boys are brothers, and family is more important than anything. That has always been true. Any place, any time. These days, House Pluritak is under attack. Those Arcavians, those damn Orientals, have crossed the seas and seen our splendor. Now they plan to take what is ours, for they have none of their own. Even at home, the other estates dream of days past, of a time before the Silver Throne ruled Medalla, a time of barbarity. Lackeys, our family is attacked from within and without. The only way to prevent the apocalypse the old priests have predicted is to elect a new emperor right now. As he spoke on, the elder's body leaned forward, as an ever faster stream of words broke through. The longer you and your brothers fight, the weaker the family will become. I have already talked to Amautu, but now that his devious Chukwa teacher has poisoned his ear, he won't listen to a word I have to say. But your arrival gives us a chance. Even if you win over all the lords of Medalla, they will never get a chance to vote you emperor if the ancestral hall won't nominate you. However, the ancestors have rescinded your title as crown prince and they won't restore it again. Believe me, I sit with these old geezers all the time. In principle, I am one of them. They would rather see the Twin Isles sink into the sea than admit their mistakes. Even more so, now that House Pluritak is in crisis, the Achilleas have become the most powerful clan in Medalla. Neither they nor their allies will ever support you. However, they firmly stand behind Pasha. If you could just give up on the crown and support him instead, all our problems would be solved. The family retains its strength, the empire is stable and you brothers can lay down your differences before the family tears itself apart. Please at least consider, Lackeys. Pasha is a good boy, and he values loyalty. If you support him now, you will want nothing in your life. I can guarantee you that. And leave the empire to that shrew Spuria and her den of snakes. Korko replied with a sneer. Although Pasha looked like a puppet of the Achillea clan to Korko, his grandfather frowned at the prince's demeanor. No matter what problem you might have with Lady Achillea and her brother's house, they are still one of the estates. Even if they challenge our authority, they will always do it within our ancient rules, rules which have secured our family's position for centuries. Lord Achillea can conspire all he wants, but at least he is a Yaku, unlike those foreigners who stand behind Amautu. You underestimate Pasha, Lackeys. As a woman, it will be impossible for Lady Achillea to stretch her influence beyond the small court anyways. If we combine our strengths now and cease our squabbles, we can contain the Achillea estate with one hand. For a while, Korko sat and watched his grandfather's nervous appearance. His eyes flitted across the room and his fingers had begun to turn his cup again. Of course the prince understood how hard it must have been for the honorable man to make this kind of shameless request. Even then, he had done so to guarantee the future of House Pluritak. Korko could never hate his grandfather for his focus on family. In fact, the elder's line of thought made a lot of sense once he calmed down to think about it. Thus, Korko only answered with difficulty, after a deep sigh. Grandfather, you know how much I respect you, but I can't follow your wish. Not on this. I understand what's best for the family, but that's not my biggest priority right now. I want to serve not only our house, but the Yaku people. I want to serve anyone who lives on this land. You know, back in Arcavia, I think I found a path to guide them into a better future. Tonight, I'll meet up with Pasha. If I can truly believe that he will be a good emperor, if I can believe that I'll be able to follow this path under him, as his advisor, I don't mind stepping back. For a Medallan prince, it wasn't unusual to become his brother's advisor, if he supported his brother's claim early on. In contrast, the princes who opposed the eventual emperor would end up exiled on an island in the eastern or western sea, if they were lucky. The unlucky ones would simply disappear, erased from history. Thank you, lackeys. Please give the boy a fair chance. That is all I ask for, Caelestis said as his face relaxed at last. His hand swung around to prove the man's confusion. Even though it had been conditional, the old man must have not expected Corco to agree to the request. But he best show some sincerity. Have him show up here before the banquet. And tell him to visit his father for heaven's sake. From everything I've seen so far, his attitude is a serious problem. I will talk to him and make him understand. Pasha will understand the wisdom in reliance on his own family over the Achilia clan, the old man said with a vigorous nod. Somehow, Corco felt that Caelestis had taken his conditions too lightly, as if Corco had already given up on the throne. Accompanied by another frown, he decided to stress his determination one last time. Tell him clearly. If the kid makes any trouble, I'll cling to the throne with my dying breath, even if I'm doomed to fail. Chapter 52 A Great Hero. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Since today's banquet was meant to reintroduce Prince Corco into Metala's society, he would have to meet the representatives of the Empire's estates. However, only few outside of the imperial family were allowed into the palace complex even in the best of times. With the city engulfed in a tense atmosphere, these were far from good times. As such, the inner city mansion of House Pluritac had been chosen to host the banquet in favor of Pluritac Castle within the Silver Palace. After Corco had spent some more time with Elder Caelestis to recount his adventures overseas, he had met up with Primus to give him some much-needed pointers before they had to make their way over to the Pluritac mansion. Although the prince would miss Fidelio's support, at least young Master Petrocilius was a noble heir, so any small mistakes could be chalked up to his inexperience by the other guests. Even better, Primus wasn't an official part of Corco's retinue and smaller missteps by his new attendant wouldn't reflect back onto him. It was step one in Corco's grand bullshit avoidance plan. Somewhat reassured of his choices, Corco's eyes left Primus and turned into the well-lit and well-filled courtyard. If one were to look at the central courtyard of House Pluritac's inner city mansion, it would have the appearance of a cloud. A flat base on one side and 5 large alcoves arranged in an arc to its opposite. While the structure guaranteed privacy for each of the individual groups inside the alcoves, it also allowed all guests to view the entertainment presented in the center of the court. At this moment, all assembled had the displeasure of listening to Spuria's self-absorbed speech. This empress had been too distraught at her dear husband's death, but then she heard the next piece of tragic news. She had also lost a son overseas. Even though he had been prepared for nonsense, they had been obstructed before the banquet even started. According to the rules of Medalan nobility, Corco couldn't make his entrance until the head of his house had introduced him. To his great dismay, Caelestis had stopped being a member of his house when he joined the ancestral hall, so the role defaulted to the next most senior family member, Spuria. For now, they were stuck backstage, until the witch was done wasting his time. Rather than listen to the woman's nonsense and get himself worked up more, the prince thought back to his grandfather's plea. In fact, he wouldn't mind if his brother were to become emperor. Corco didn't care much for the power, fame or responsibility which would come with the territory. Calm and steady work from behind the scenes were much more his style, and his vision for Medalla would remain just as possible. Getting his hopes up was a surefire way to be disappointed, Corco knew that. Nonetheless, he still hoped that he wouldn't have to play target to anyone who would oppose change. Family was important after all. The least Prince Pasha could do was play human shield for his big brother. The more he thought about it, the more Corco hoped his baby brother would turn out to be reasonable and susceptible to his own ideas. Considering everything Corco had heard about Pasha so far, the scenario seemed unlikely. Prince Corco, it is time. Primus poked Corco's shoulder to wake him up. When he looked out into the yard, he realized that the shameless woman had finished her shameless speech. For now he laid aside his fantasies, took a deep breath and stepped out into the light with long strides. Underscore 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 underscore. Congratulations on your return, Prince Corco. This prince thanks Lord Fulcinius for his generosity. As he answered with simple pleasantry, Corco accepted yet another grape-shaped trinket from one of his guests. This time it was a wine cup in the shape of a grape cluster. Since the official start of the banquet, guests would arrive at his seat to offer their greetings and a small present. In principle, none of their actions were impolite, but the types of gifts he received were problematic. Grapes, grapevines and raindrops, the same motifs would repeat over and over. In Medalla, any of these designs symbolized life and birth. Not only was it a subtle jab at Corco's own blue ware, a defiance of his mourning, the presents also mocked the banquet's official occasion. Any social event in Medalla had its own rigorous procedure which had to be adhered to by all participants. If they didn't, they would be considered uncultured by other nobles. However, there was no official event to commemorate a family member's resurrection. The organizer of the banquet would still have to find a proper occasion to call the lords of Medalla together. Unfortunately for Corco, that organizer was the official head of House Pluritac, Spuria Achilia. Thus, Lady Achilia did the only logical thing and announced his rebirth as a simple birth. All the gifts reflected the occasion, but were sent with obvious malicious intent. A look at the night schedule made Spuria's provocation even clearer. After all, no other part of the banquet was in any way connected to a baby shower, all of it just a facade to mock her dear son. Thus, this old man will take his leave. I toast on Prince Corco's health and long life. Salute, said Lord Fulcinius and raised the cup in his hand. Salute, Corco replied in a flat voice and drank up his own. As he watched the lord's back disappear into the CRWD, Corco's face sank even more. They truly are too much, Primus spoke up. Every last one of them asks Prince to drink. Such an obvious ploy. It's a cheap trick. At least grandfather has been looking out for us. Before the start of the banquet, Caelestis had talked with Spuria and made sure that Primus would be left in charge of Corco's wine throughout the evening. In light of the recent assassination attempt, the Empress Mother had been unable to refute the request. Thus, Primus now served water mixed with a hint of wine. Even then, he would barely cover the bottom of Corco's cup with each pour. At this rate, the prince would drown before the lords could get him drunk. How plain it is of the Empress Mother to take her strategy from a tale even children would know, Primus said. I'm not even a king, let alone a monkey king, Corco replied in reference to the old Medallan fable. Still, does it not seem too obvious? Placing us in the leftmost alcove when we should be seated in the center, forcing Crown Prince to stand up and greet guests from such a deep chair. Never would I have expected the Empress Mother to be this cheap. Whenever a guest showed up, Corco would have to get up from his seat to receive them in accordance with etiquette. Anything else would be deemed impolite. However, the seats in his alcove were built wide and deep, so he had to afford considerable effort every time he left the chair. It didn't help any that he couldn't use both of his hands, with his left arm still in a sling. To top it all off, the heavens had decided to make the evening especially grim. Even though clouds had been unloaded by last night's storm, the clammy weather still covered the entire venue in a film of moisture. Made aware of his stiff fingers, Corco rubbed his hands together. Although the cultivation helped, the constant wetness still caused him great discomfort. For now that woman is just clearing the way. The real fun starts later. His new mother would assume that the combination of alcohol, rudeness and discomfort would be enough for Corco's calm facade to crack, especially with how aggressive he had been when they had met in the small court. Meanwhile, a great number of lords would always linger within the main court and spy into Corco's alcove. Any faux pas from the prince would turn into public knowledge within seconds. Though even if none of these methods would work, they would still wear down his patience and make him more susceptible to whatever hurdle they might make him jump later. With minimal foresight, Korko had ignored the Furia's attempts to play benevolent mother after she had banished him into his corner. Apart from that, he had been forced into a passive position, busy in his attempt to ignore everything around him. "Are you all right, my boy? Best not to do anything rash. For now, we shouldn't be ambitious. Get through tonight without any incidents." From his other side, Sanko spoke up. The southern lord had helped his nephew with the greetings all evening, something the prince was more than grateful for. As the guests trickled in, they would fill the seats within the alcoves at their leisure. With a sigh, Korko turned to check the seats in the back. Since the traditional and southern houses were on his side, Korko thought he would have a significant force, but only 6 of the total 20 southern houses had chosen his alcove. Since the war was still fresh on their minds, most would choose to sit away from any of the princes, even if his uncle was the governor of the south. As for the traditionalist faction, they represented the weaker estates in the empire. Since they would be the first lords to lose their land and status in times of great turmoil, they were more adamant in their adherence to the rules. They might have been many, but because of their weak forces and low reputation, the traditionalist estates couldn't help him project strength. "Prince Amautu has been fair and respectful, at the very least," Sanko continued after he hadn't received an answer from his nephew for a while. This time Korko responded, even if it was with a sneer. "And yet his people happily ask me to drink just like the rest. Politeness doesn't equal respect. What I'm more interested in is when exactly that third brother of mine will show up." Again his mood soured. Even when he had asked his grandfather for a pre-banquet meeting with Pasha, the brat hadn't shown up at all. This does not seem unusual, does it? At banquets, the most important lords are to appear last. Primus recited back his knowledge of standard etiquette. "If we go by the book you might be right, but consider this. The guy's older brother, who was declared dead, has returned from a long journey overseas, alive and well. Even worse, only 2 days ago he was the victim of an assassination attempt. Pasha has been in the city for as long as my grandfather, yet even now he takes his sweet time as he prepares for his dramatic entry. Not to mention, grandfather should have reminded him to play nice. If he's out to win me over, it's a bad start. It appears your words have wings, boy, and they have been carried all the way across the mansion," Sanko said as he motioned towards the approaching group. At its head walked the third prince of Medalla, Pakakutek Tidu Tershu Pluritak. While Pasha's group still swaggered towards Korko's alcove, the first prince rose from his seat to meet them halfway. True to his grandfather's plea, he wanted to give his brother a chance at a proper first impression. One look at his little brother and Korko realized that the rumors hadn't been exaggerated. Prince Pasha was a true giant, no less than Fidelio. Still not fully grown, the prince was already a head taller than Korko, an impression he enhanced with his straightened spine and raised head. With his impressive physique, his lavish gold and silver armor and his long ponytail, he looked like a hero straight out of the old legends. In large strides, the hero closed the distance. When the brothers met at the edge of Korko's alcove, Korko could feel all eyes focus on them. "Welcome back, brother. I have truly missed you." As he proclaimed his brotherly love for the entire court to hear, Pasha passed over proper etiquette to hug the older prince. Air escaped through Korko's gnashed teeth as the hero's paw slammed into his brother's bandaged shoulder. "Oh no, my apologies," Pasha said, hand before his mouth as he stepped back. This prince has been shocked to hear about that terrible attack, but in his joy forgot about brother's injury. "How is your arm, brother?" He should have been angry at the hero's clumsy assault or his horribly faked shock, but Korko was too surprised at how poor his brother's acting was, especially compared to the boy's shrewd mother. Even so, Korko smiled through the pain and tried to lighten the mood. Just as he had promised his grandfather. "Please be careful, little brother. My arm's still in a sling," Korko said as he plastered his face with a pitiable smile. Though the first prince had tried to sound more affectionate with his choice of words, Pasha frowned as soon as he heard the term little brother. Even if you are injured, this hero will not have you call him little. It is a slight on this hero's dignity and will not be tolerated. Pasha blew up out of nowhere. In response, the older brother only managed to raise his eyebrows in confusion. Sure, whatever the great hero wishes. This humble mortal apologizes. Unable or unwilling to pick up on Korko's sarcasm, Prince Pasha nodded his head, a smug smile on his face. Great, Korko thought, and the evening started so well. Chapter 53 Streak of Lie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the awkward opening, Prince Pasha began to introduce the companions to his side with a grand wave of his arm. Brother, you should still remember our uncle. Lord Divitius Achilia. Lord Achilia, governor of the West, Spuria's brother and not actually Korko's uncle, was much smaller and a lot less showy than his nephew. After his introduction, the unremarkable figure stepped out of Prince Pasha's shadow and in front of today's guest of honor. It is this governor's great pleasure to finally meet Prince Korko again. To his great misfortune, this lord only arrived in Arguna a short while ago. Thus, it was impossible to prepare a suitable gift for Prince's banquet. His words were as smooth as his wide smile was open. At once, Korko could tell that this one was a much better actor than Pasha. Lord Achilia, you could have just taken some stuff from the Silver Palace. Now that House Achilia has moved into Pluritak Castle, it would have been easy to just take whatever you need, right? Unlike with his brother, there was no reason for Korko to be polite with the Achilia brood. Now was the time to get rid of his frustrations. Prince Korko jests. The Empress Mother stopped being a member of House Achilia the moment she was wed to the late Emperor Tidu. With pinpoint precision, Divitius poked at Korko's wounds and seemed to gear up for a well-planned provocation, but any of his potential ploys were dismantled by an inconvenient outcry for justice. How dare you talk to uncle like that? Even if you are my brother, this hero will not stand for it. Prince Pasha barged into the conversation. Even when he supported the most powerful lord of Medalla against a powerless prince's bullying, the self-proclaimed hero somehow managed to sound righteous. The fact that Korko was his own brother or that he was much weaker than the governor didn't seem to matter much for the hero's justice. Under a menacing stare, Korko saw his brother step closer. Rather than be intimidated, the first prince rolled his eyes and made half a step back. Hoping beyond hope, he was still trying to de-escalate the conflict. Yeah, okay. Let's just get this over with. Tell me about your other lackey. Despite his best efforts, Korko was just about done with his younger brother. This could not possibly be the same man his grandfather had called a good child. Before the good child was about to further could puff up spread his feathers even more, Divitius grabbed the boy's arm and motioned towards the back. Meanwhile, the fat, pale man to Pasha's left stepped forward to introduce himself, a businesslike smile on his face. Prince Korko, it is my honor to make your acquaintance. My name is Borgarson. Steen Borgarson. I am a representative of the great empire of Kalia. Right away Korko hated the man. As someone who had worked with the Kalyans before, he knew that Kalia wasn't actually an empire, but a small kingdom instead. Even so, there was no way the Kalyan nobility would allow a common merchant to represent them. Even so, Korko overlooked the merchant's obvious lies. Any time spent with the slick trader was nothing but wasted effort. Plus, there was a far more fun issue for Korko to address. Kalia, is it? You might not have heard, but I spent quite some time over in Arcavia. Kalia was a place famous for its unique, red-haired people, wasn't it? Korko smiled as he pretended to make small talk. Prince is correct. With faked enthusiasm, the merchant nodded, no doubt sure in the knowledge that he had his mark hooked. So, I was wondering, the mark asked with a smile. Has Lord Kalas recently misplaced one of his guards? Red hair, pale skin, black cloak. He would be around my brother's height, I think. I remember seeing someone like that 2 nights ago. Korko said, the harmless smile still plastered on his face. Meanwhile, he observed his own mark, to look for signs of recognition. That would not be possible. All my men are still with me. Only for a moment, the merchant's eyes shook, before he returned to his business smile and calm attitude. Still, for Korko, it was enough. Now he knew who had supplied his would-be killer. I wonder what Margrave Hakon would think about this, Korko wondered, with a thought back to his former accomplice from Kalya. That's good then. Wouldn't want to start our relationship on the wrong foot, would we, he said instead. Perhaps eager to change the topic, Steen brought out his own present. As a show of goodwill, our great empire of Kalya will present Prince Korko with this quality wine. It is the best in our guild selection, the merchant said as he handed the prince more of his own brandy. For a moment Korko was left speechless, so he passed the bottle back to Primus without a word. Although his actions were rude, the prince was too busy to care about the merchant's feelings. Rather, he tried to guess which Arcavian noble had stocked up on his brandy and then made a killing with resale. While Borgarson still waited on the first prince's reply, the third prince was all gathered up again at last. Filled with confidence, the hero would not wait on anyone. Ah yes, brother. This hero will also present you with a gift to commemorate this meeting. Pasha's attendant handed Korko his gift. Without any warning, the small object lay heavy in his hand. What Korko found sparkling in the evening light was a small, beautiful silver turtle. Korko's eyes grew large as a weight seemed to settle in his stomach and brain all at the same time. How could a single person have so little sense? What in the actual fuck are you doing? He asked his brother in disbelief, his voice barely a whisper. In Yaku culture, the giant turtle was considered a benevolent guide through the underworld. Thus, a turtle would only ever be gifted during a funeral. Receiving one at any other time was considered bad luck, even a curse. It implied that the one to give the gift wished the recipient a quick death. This hero is not quite sure what brother means. Despite his feigned ignorance, the wide grin on Pasha's face showed Korko the extent of his brother's callous nature. What no combination of rude gifts, hidden insults or wine had managed, Pasha achieved with a single tactless gesture. Whose fucking funeral is that fucking turtle for exactly? Mine or your father's? All conversation around the court stopped to the boom of Korko's shout. Lords turned their heads and pricked up their ears, eager to listen in on the confrontation between the princes. As if he had expected Korko's outburst, Pasha replied with a calm, clear voice, eager to make all lords hear their conflict. How presumptuous of you, brother. Do you imply that all the houses who have given gifts today have insulted you? Even if you are my brother, this hero will not stand for this slight on the great nobles of Medalla. With a slack face Korko stared at the idiot hero, unable to believe his ears. If this was Pasha's grand plan, Korko hoped he hadn't spent too much time on it. Everyone else sent grapes and raindrops, he shouted as his arms waved around the venue. Those are perfectly fine to celebrate a rebirth. You didn't. You just gave me a turtle, you dumb fuck. If you can't understand what that means, there must be something wrong with your head. Is that your fucking problem maybe? At his older brother's sharp reprimand, Pasha became defiant. Once again he stepped forward, and looked down his nose, into his brother's eyes. Another provocation, this hero has been educated by the greatest teachers of the empire. How could anyone dispute this hero's intellect? Despite his brother's imposing size, Korko wouldn't back down this time. At this point, he was far too angry to consider his promise to Caelestis. Then if there's nothing wrong with you, you'll understand perfectly well what that turtle symbolizes. So I ask again, what the fuck is that fucking turtle for? Your brother's funeral, or your father's? And don't try to hide behind the other houses. Or that snake-like uncle of yours. You brought the fucking thing, you fucking answer. At last the hero had realized that something was wrong. As if in slow motion, he looked around and saw the various nobles glued to his lips. Drops of sweat began to bloom on Prince Pasha's face. No wonder, as he had not only broken every rule of etiquette, he had even tried to drag the other houses into his mess. After he had maneuvered himself into a corner, he looked around in search for an answer, but his older brother beat him to the punch. Now that I think about it, you haven't visited father even once since the funeral. In that case, wouldn't it make sense for you to celebrate your father's death? You get to strut around and play great hero after all. All you need to do is squander your father's legacy and give it away to whoever plays pretend with you. This might sound harsh, but as the elder brother, I should be the one to teach you when you screw up, so here's the deal. When your father dies, you visit his grave. Preferably more than once in 2 seasons. You don't take pleasure in his death either. When your eldest brother comes back after 7 years of disappearance, you shouldn't be the last one to greet him, you should be the fucking first. And greet him by yourself. Don't bring along your new owner and some fat fucking traitor who shouldn't even be anywhere near this place. And most importantly, don't give him a mother. Fucking turtle. Korko paced around the room as he got himself more and more worked up. By the end of his speech, his screams could be heard all over the inner city. He didn't care. Halfway through his last sentence, he remembered his brother's gift, still sat in his hand, and fired it onto a table, where it crashed through pots and pans, under a loud bang and clatter. For a moment, serenity returned to the court. No one moved, as if frozen in time. By now, Korko no longer cared what his brother or his grandfather or anyone else in the courtyard might think. He simply let out all of his accumulated frustration on his shocked younger brother. And what the fuck is with the getup? Your father still lies bared up and you run around like a peacock who fell into a fucking vat of gold, calling yourself hero. All proud of yourself. What sort of mythical beast do you intend to slay in that impractical bullshit armor? No matter how many famous teachers you pile up, you'll still be an idiot. Why else would you act like this and ruin your own reputation even more than that of your own family? As for your supporters, Korko focused in on Lord Achilia. Do you know why they follow you? They do it because they know. They know if they want to undermine the order of the empire, the one our ancestors have so painstakingly created over generations, all they have to do is keep you trapped in your little heroic fairy tale. You are not welcome at my banquet or anywhere near me. Not until you go and apologize to your father, you spoilt fucking brat. At last Korko's barrage awoke Pasha from his stupor. With a puffed up chest and clenched fists, he marched towards his brother, his intentions clear. Even when Davicius tried to hold the youngster back by the shoulder, he brushed off the hand and closed the distance with purpose. I will show my older brother just who is in charge, his entire posture seemed to scream. Dwarfed by his brother's massive size, Korko turned his torso to the side and grabbed his injured arm to protect his shoulder. Even though everyone around had looked forward to the fight, to the lords, Korko seemed to back down from the confrontation already. Then, out of nowhere, a streak of light shot in between the brothers to separate them, and both obedient boys jumped back. As their eyes followed the object, they found a heavy axe embedded in the wooden wall of the alcove. With calm strides, Sanko stepped between the two brothers and retrieved his weapon with a single, firm grasp. So that was where I left my axe, the governor said into the silence. Korko, my boy. You don't look too healthy. How about you go get some fresh air while I take care of our good guests? Korko couldn't even see his uncle's provocative look towards the third prince's party. In disbelief over what had almost happened, he looked down towards his injured arm before he turned and left the stunned crowd behind. Chapter 54 A Moment of Peace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When Korko stopped his escape and looked at his surroundings again, he realized that he had left the banquet far behind. Instead, he had reached a walkway next to one of the mansion's side courts. Once he had calmed down, he crossed the walkway, leaned his arms on the railing and looked up at the sun about to disappear behind the rooftop across the garden. Then he looked down at his arms and pulled his knife out of his left gauntlet. When his brother had come towards him with all of his imposing presence, he had almost reacted on reflex. Luckily, Sanko had stepped in and allowed Korko to regain his senses long enough to get away. Otherwise, he might have done something irreversible. Drained, he looked up to the sky. Why would he do that? Why would he say that? He asked himself questions he knew he would find no answer to. Though even when he ran, he couldn't find solitude. A sudden sound of footsteps spurred Korko back into action. With practiced movements, he hid his knife again and turned his head towards the intruder. Some distance away, a young girl had entered the court and walked through the garden with slow, wistful steps. It seemed like he was not the only unhappy person at the banquet. Not long after, the girl had also spotted the prince and recognition formed on her face. She went up to the walkway and bounded towards Korko, before she came to a stop just 2 steps away. "Brother," she called out, "welcome home." "Prima?" Korko asked, after an uncomfortable length of silence. "I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." "That is unsurprising. You left when I was 8 after all. Back then, you would not have much to do with some little girl," Prima smiled. "You've grown up well," Korko answered. It was his attempt at small talk. In truth, Prima had inherited her mother's physique, tall and stout. Not exactly his type, but as Yaku women were meant to birth a powerful heir, her looks were considered an ideal for many Medalan nobles. "Thank you, brother. I am joyous to see you back safe. Although disconsolate, I did not bring a gift." With impeccable form, the girl bowed in apology. Though her words were stiff, Korko could find genuine joy on her kind features. "That's fine. I think this is a better present than anything else I've gotten today." Confused, she looked around in search of the hidden present. She hadn't brought anything, after all. "What might this present be?" Prima asked at last. "Someone who seems happy to see me, and a genuine family moment." "I was starting to lose hope, to be honest," Korko replied with a clouded smile as he looked out into the courtyard. With how the rest of his family had greeted him, Prima's reaction was almost surreal. He heard the rustling of robes as the girl leaned on the railing next to him. Neither of them spoke as the atmosphere turned peaceful. After a while which seemed to last forever, Korko broke the spell. "So what are you doing here anyways? Why are you not at the banquet?" "It is an attempt to get away from Empress Mother." "Futile, I am sure. She was less than amused at your chiding of her favorite son. And she let anyone within earshot know how she felt. Must have been rough." "Sorry. You know, brother, I doubt Pasha actually meant badly. Just. How could you possibly excuse what he did?" Although he should have blown up again by all accounts, somehow Korko felt a calm he seemed to have oozed over the past days. Maybe his sister's frank kindness made him more curious than he had been agitated before. "I watched Pasha grow up," Prima continued. "After his early years, he did not have any brothers around to support him. As the only prince in the palace, he thought that all around him would be his. And why would he think different? Empress Mother spoiled him, the teachers were not allowed to correct him so he would not get upset. One time, I would sneak out and hear a teacher get whipped for it. Daring to find fault in the future emperor's divine notes, they said. I was too afraid to look and ran to escape the screams. The teacher never appeared again. Prince Pasha has believed for years that he is the chosen hero of Yakwalpa. Now suddenly these 2 strange brothers show up. Today might have been the first time I have seen Pasha get scolded by anyone, with how polite and reserved Amautu has been. Now that he is confronted with reality for the first time in his life, it might be a bit much for him. You don't seem affected by your mother's education though." In surprise, Korko looked over to his sister, but the girl still stared out into the garden. He hadn't expected any member of the imperial family to be this level-headed, especially not the youngest one. Empress Mother would not care much for a girl. Only now that I can be useful has my existence been remembered. Why does that not surprise me? So what use has your mother found for you? Empress Mother has decided on my marriage partner just days prior. You barely missed my engagement ceremony, brother. Congratulations. What name will you take? Unlike the boys who could choose their own names when they turned 16, Yaku girls would pick new given names when they were married off. Empress Mother has decided on Oxidina in honor of my partner. I liked Yasami. So go with Yasami then. At last Prima looked over and faced her brother. After a few seconds of silence, she turned back to watch the flowers. I couldn't possibly. Empress Mother says it is too flighty. Then I'll call you by it in private, if that's fine. Of course, brother, she replied with a shallow smile. Once you're away from the palace you can name yourself whatever you like anyways. No one's stopping you, you know. Korko felt like the girl should at least be able to choose her own name. After all, she wouldn't get the chance to choose anything else in her life. As Korko turned to look at the clouds as well, silence fell over the garden once more. For a while, the siblings only stood there and soaked in the quiet, until Prima mumbled, more to herself than to Korko. Sometimes I wonder if I am part of the same family. Pasha, father, mother. You as well, all of you can always do whatever you want. Again Korko looked at his sister and raised an eyebrow. Did you really just compare me to the Furia? I know you would rather not hear it, but it is the truth. All of you are always so aggressive, always so loud. Always so sure of yourselves. I could never do that. Well, it didn't do me any good back then. With a sad smile, Korko followed Prima's eyes, to try and see her view on things. By now, the place would be filled with gossip about his impossible attitude towards his brother. He really had screwed up with his outburst. Only because you are not strong enough. Empress Mother or Prince Pasha have been allowed to get angry however much they want. At least they have been since father died. I know I have to control myself, but it's tough. How could you just stand there and ignore the kinda stuff that little bastard just did? Korko really didn't like Pasha. Just try to be somewhere else. That's not helpful. A smile as light as the clouds above played around the girl's mouth. I would not ask you to run away from your troubles. But sometimes, when I have to endure, I can get away in my head. To any place I would rather be. And find peace there. Like where? Like here, the princess motioned her head towards the front. I like this yard. I can always be alone here, that was why I came to escape Empress Mother. Again the two stared out and observed the garden in silence. No noise from the banquet reached this place. Nothing but the calm murmur of a distant fountain disturbed them. It truly was a place of peace. Awkward that he had occupied his sister's place of retreat, he tried to make more conversation. Have you met your husband? His family? At least they can't be worse than the mess that is House Pluritak, right? Small talk wasn't Korko's strong suit. I am to be wed to a local Chutwa lord. It seems brother has made a promise to establish a trade route with the Chutwa. My future husband will provide a port for Prince Pasha's trade fleet. Which doesn't answer my question. I will be but a concubine. Lord Humak did not deem it necessary to come to the engagement in person. He simply sent his servant to make sure his future bargaining chip did not grow two heads. Korko heard a calm voice from the side. Through her mask of composure, he couldn't tell if his sister had accepted her fate or resigned to it. Still better than here, isn't it? Far from home in foreign lands and used as a tool, I cannot share brother's enthusiasm. If your husband doesn't like you, at least he won't bother you too much. On top of that, you'll be directly responsible for the man's wealth. If he's on the eastern coast of Chutwa, he should be an impoverished rural lord. Not like there's anything in the Verduic Sea other than pirates. Just how much money will that trade route bring your future husband? You seem like a smart cookie. If you leverage your position and play your cards right, you'll have wealth, comfort and leisure all at once. To me that sounds a whole lot better than having to deal with the Furia. Thank you for this, brother. Truly. As Corco looked over, he found his sister still focused on the yard, her smile as clouded as his own. Although they each were alone with their thoughts, the siblings shared in the soothing glow of the evening sun as they leaned on the railing at the edge of the courtyard. However, reality would not stop for the two. The arrival of more unwanted guests soon broke the peace of the moment. Prima. Come over to mother, the shrill voice of the Empress Mother resounded in the halls. In response, the siblings shared a secretive grin before they turned around to welcome Hurricane Spuria. As always, the woman traveled with an entourage large enough to fit her ego. Surrounded by various ministers, servants, and bootlickers, she closed the distance to the two. Unlike her daughter, she stopped her feet several steps away, too far to hold a comfortable conversation. Years within the palace had trained Prima to take hints. As such, she walked up straight away and with a short, "Greetings, Empress Mother," she entered the row of followers. Without a complaint, Prima positioned herself next to a haggard man who wore his hair short and his nose up in the sky. Corco, on the other hand, watched the assortment of dregs Spuria had surrounded herself with, while he considered how to confront the woman on her self-importance. In the end, he decided to play by the rules. There was no reason to make any trouble for his sister out of pure pettiness. 2 large steps closed the distance, before he hinted at a bow. Prince Corco greets Lady Spuria. At his lack of submission, the dregs geared up to respond in outrage, but the Empress Mother beat them to it. Scandalous. First you slander your own brother in front of Metala's entire lordship and then you disrespect your mother. How could one with so little decorum dare call himself prince? The more he was subjected to Spuria's shrill voice, the more Corco's shoulders scrounged up in reflex. Still, he wouldn't give in to torture. He would stand his ground. Then go on and tell me where exactly I slandered your precious boy. Was anything I said untrue? It is not what you said, son. Your tone itself is impossible. You will embarrass our whole family with your attitude. He might be better off for it, you know. It's called righteous fury, Spuria. With all the practice you get in, shouldn't you be an expert on anger? Your brat mocked his own father's, your own husband's, death. That brother of mine really deserved a little dose of reality. Prince Corco. You should consider your own filial piety first. How will the elders of the ancestral hall think about a prince who cannot honor his parents? At least you will have to address your mother with her proper title. Spuria fired back. Etiquette means nothing outside of court. Right now we are in the private mansion of the Pluritak clan, so I have the freedom to call you whatever I want. I don't know how you've sneaked your way into this laughable Empress Mother title, but your fake position will garner no respect from me, concubine Spuria. The old woman gnashed her teeth so hard Corco thought they might just burst. Even though it was a shame, she managed to compose herself before his dream could be fulfilled. Out of nowhere, Spuria put on a faked smile and began to introduce her followers. Corco, my son, let me introduce to you. This is Master Mazatl. He has come all the way from the Grand Chutwa Empire as a dignitary of Great Duke Humak. Master Mazatl honors us with his presence to examine Prima, the Duke's prospective future bride. His eyes still faced with the ceiling, the haggard man next to Prima stepped forward to stand in front of Corco. Without a word, the servant waited for the first prince of the empire to greet him first. So long as it would make things easier for his sister, Corco was happy to indulge the man's vanity. Prince Corcopeka Titu Pluritak greets Master Mazatl. Very good. It seems the princes of your country still know to behave in front of a superior. Mazatl replied back in Chutwa, so Corco also switched over to the foreign language. This prince has heard of the wonders of Chutwa and would love to see them one day. Sister Prima thinks the same. Surely she will make a worthy bride for Duke Humac. Yes, it would be surprising for her not to admire the greatness of the Chutwa Empire. I am sure she will try her hardest. When Korko was about to explode at the man's self-important attitude, he found relief from the most unlikely of places. Before he could fire back a nasty comment, Lady Achilia shoved more people into his face. My son, this empress does not want to interrupt your chat, but there is someone you need to meet. This is Prince Wakoka, son of Tauko Hopatek, Green King of the Verdant Isles. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Prince Korko. That was quite the spectacle back there. Prince Wakoka was a tall, lean man who looked to be in his 20s. Unlike all other faces in the crowd, he showed a frank smile as he congratulated Korko on his savage rant. So long as Prince Wakoka found my brother's foolishness amusing, Korko replied. For now, he would assume that Wakoka's positive attitude was genuine. This prince brought a gift for the occasion as well. Before Korko could be surprised, Wakoka had handed a bag to Korko. Once the prince had opened his present, he found a white powder inside. Unable to identify the substance, he looked up at the foreign prince in question. Saltpeter. We have an entire shipload's worth prepared for Prince Korko's return, Wakoka said with a self-satisfied smile, his fists pressed into his hips. That is genuinely useful. Where's the golden grapevines? Korko was baffled. The Verdant Isles don't like to play games. Maybe I should consider moving then. Just as the two princes were starting to get along, a shrill sound interrupted his conversation once again. And this, my dear son, is Prince Wakoka's sister, Princess Sumaki. To Korko's surprise, he was already acquainted with the girl. They had met 2 nights ago, when he had threatened her at gunpoint and she had tried to stab him to death. Korko had expected someone as cold-blooded as his accomplice to be anything, but certainly not a princess. On the other hand, Sumaki offered a proper greeting as she pretended to meet him for the first time. Princess Sumaki Hopatek gives her greetings, Prince Korko. Prince Korko greets Princess Sumaki, he answered back with trepidation. Princess Sumaki is to be engaged to second Prince Amautu. Her brother has come along to meet the groom and to negotiate the dowry, Spuria buzzed in again. Right away, Korko understood Spuria's plan. From the Wela's estate of House Achilia into the Verduic Sea, through the Verdant Isles with the support of the local ruler and then into Chutwa through a dukedom on the east coast. Looks like you've built up a nice trade network for Pasha. I just wonder whether or not my second brother will be obedient and play along with your plans. As the child's mother and the official family head of House Pluritak, this empress has any right to find a suitable match for her children, even without their approval. In fact, maybe it is time to find a partner for you as well, my son. Maybe somewhere nice and remote, to calm your nerves. I can see that the accident 2 nights ago has been terrible on your spirit. You were right, my son. Here might truly be the Pluritak mansion. In here, you may truly call me as you wish. But nevertheless, in here, this empress is the master of the house. With her speech finished and her self-satisfied grin established, Spuria turned and left, before Korko had a chance to respond. Always eager to impress, her lackeys followed on her heels. Only Princess Sumaki stayed behind. Her brother, who had already turned to leave, looked back and to see what his sister had planned. Although Prince Wakoka seemed uncomfortable with Spuria's attitude and gave Korko a troubled look, the princess had enjoyed the show. I understand the joke now, Prince Korko, she said, in this family, one truly needs to forget one's shame. Chapter 55 The Merchant Prince. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After she had said her piece, Princess Sumaki walked off. Even though her brother had followed her, he had apologized for his sister's rude behavior first. Right as the siblings disappeared around a corner, Sanko and Primus emerged from a hallway. A content grin on his face, his uncle pat Korko on the back. You handled yourself well there, but maybe it's time to go back now. You'll have to look steadfast in front of our people, Sanko said. I lost my temper. His head aimed at his feet, Korko still beat himself up over his mess of a confrontation with Pasha. These things happen. Unless someone were to seek fault, your reaction was entirely understandable. None of our allies will think less of you, and you managed to control yourself quite well in front of the Furia just now. Surprised, the prince looked back up. You were watching. Ha ha ha. The kid tried to run out by himself as soon as we found you, but this old man thought it might be better to let you sort things out yourself. Either way, you'll have to stand on your own 2 feet someday. Can't have my axe helping you out all the time. Sanko laughed as he put his arm around the stiff shoulders of Primus. Well, I don't think I did that well, Korko replied with a wry smile. At least you did better than I expected. I thought you'd explode again when that pompous Chutwa servant started to speak in foreign tongues. When Korko thought back to the arrogant master Mazadal, realized that he could control himself because he had been more concerned with his sister than his own pride. Prince Korko, at least now we know that Prince Pasha will not be an opponent. No such simpleton will become emperor. While Primus tried his best to throw off Sanko's heavy arm, he ridiculed Pasha in an attempt to cheer up his teacher. In response, Korko went into lecture mode again. You really shouldn't underestimate Pasha, or anyone, for that matter. Who knows, maybe it's all an act. After all, a weak successor would attract all the strong lords who strive for more power. So Prince Pasha has tricked the other lords. Then your words at the end of your speech were meant to dissuade lords from joining him. In principle, Primus didn't have a bad idea. Earlier, Korko had claimed any lord to support Pasha would only do so to exploit the imperial family. Just the claim by itself would damage the reputation of Prince Pasha's allies should they insist on their support. However, Korko didn't think it would help much. If it were that easy, he said as his hand ran through his hair. No one ambitious enough to challenge the authority of the palace is gonna change their mind just because I exposed their plan. They can come up with any number of excuses. At least now, we'll know one thing. Everyone who still supports Pasha after tonight will be our enemy. Come on my boy, we really should go back, Sanko urged again. After you, uncle, Korko smiled back. Although he had left the banquet in distress, he was glad to have taken his little time out. Despite his meeting with Spuria, he felt a lot calmer already. As the trio returned back into their camp's alcove, many of the lords greeted Korko with encouraging nods and smiles. It seemed the atmosphere was not as poor as he had thought. I told you, my boy. Most estates are quite happy to see someone stand up to that self-important peacock, Sanko said with a grin. It was nice that his uncle was optimistic, but Korko was sure that the lords in the other camps hadn't taken his outburst this well. On the plus side, Korko's description of his baby brother might stain him like blood on white robes, with how fond of gossip the lords were. Once the evening was back on track, Korko resumed the work expected of him. As part of his duties, he would have to visit the tables of all his guests for a return visit. First, he went around his own alcove to give back small gifts in return for the ones he had received before. He could also use the chance to talk to all the lords in his camp and promise solutions to their varied troubles. As a bonus, he got to listen to their complaints about Prince Pasha's attitude. Maybe things weren't all bad. After the sky had gone dark and the torches and coals had been lit, he had finished up his obligations within his own camp. For a while Korko sat back down to relax his shoulders, have a little drink and observe the happenings in the central court. The spring is coming by many signs, the trays are up, the hedges broken down, that fence the haystack, and the remnant shines like some old antique fragment weathered brown. And where suns peep, in every sheltered place, the little early buttercups unfold a glittering star or two. Till many trace the edges of the blackthorn clumps in gold. And then a little lamb bolts up behind the hill and wags his tail to meet the yo, and then another, sheltered from the wind, lies all his length as dead. And lets me go close by and never stirs but baking lies, with legs stretched out as though he could not rise. While Korko had made himself busy, the center of the yard had changed appearances. Since turning the center into a viewing gallery had backfired, Spuria had been forced to re-examine her plans for the evening. Instead of wasting the central space as a collective spy network, representatives would now stay within their chosen alcoves. Meanwhile, the central court would house various types of entertainment for them, a far more reasonable setup. At this point, various young lords and scholars took turns up on a stage in the center. Eager to try and impress the powerful figures of the empire with their sophistication, they recited poetry or played music. Korko had no interest in any of it. After all, there was still more work to be done. He had received congratulations from many houses throughout the evening, so he would have to pay a return visit to them all unless he wanted to be called uncultured. Let's get this over with. Thus, Korko took Primus and his prepared gifts and went on an epic quest to the neighboring alcove. Since the prince had been placed into the court's far left corner and thus only had one neighbor to choose from, which group to visit next turned into a trivial decision. Once they had reached the next nook over, they found it in a far less harmonious atmosphere than their own. Various lords were seated in small, isolated groups which talked among themselves in hushed voices, as they threw suspicious glances into their surroundings. Something like this was to be expected, since the groups represented here were all members of the so-called neutral faction. Some of the lords were undecided on which prince to support, some wanted to stay out of the succession altogether, but still needed to be involved in the events of the capital to stay relevant. Some wanted to use the weakness of the royal family to strengthen their own powers, some were from the north, some from the south and some from the east. It was a mess. What an honored guest has graced us with his presence. A booming voice from the center of the alcove announced Korko's arrival. To follow up on the voice, a tall, wild-looking man in his 50s with long, braided hair under a bald head came towards the prince and his attendant. Lord Vilka. Prince Korko thanks you for your gifts and good wishes and has come to reply in kind. Please kindly accept this gift as a token of gratitude. As practiced in their home court, Korko reached behind and waited for Primus to put the prepared present into his hand. Of course, the gifts had all been hand-picked by the prince himself. As an experienced merchant, Korko would never miss a chance to promote his business. Oh, what is it? The old warrior asked as he held up the strange objects. They are valuable treasures from the east. Soap, perfume and a feather quill. The perfume's smell will last much longer than ordinary flower waters. The soap is an excellent way to remove dirt and other impurities during the bath, while the quill is an extremely practical writing tool. They also come in high-quality crystal glass wares. Good, good. Come, Prince. Let this lord show you around as you give out your trinkets. The men of the south should stick together after all. Although Lord Vilka seemed to care little for Korko's wares, he still helped him break the ice with the present lords. Though suspicious, the prince would accept any goodwill he could get. Some of the houses were still worked up about the earlier public display between the two princes and Vilka could help smooth the waves. Vilka's own stance on the succession wasn't hard to guess. Of course he would favor an outcome which included an independent Sashi. Not only was he one of the richest southern lords right next to Sanko, his estate of Kazhan was also placed right at the mouth of the narrow sea, the border between the northern and the southern isles. As the front line in wars between the two islands, geography gifted his estate with a political position of unique importance. Adding on Vilka's own prowess in battle and his advocacy for more powerful local estates, and it was no surprise that he had become the de facto leader among the neutral lords. Thus, he was the one best suited to lead Korko around the alcove with its mixture of backgrounds and agendas. With the southern lord's help, the visit went smoothly. As planned, the merchant prince gave out sample after sample of his products, but of course the fun couldn't last. Maybe Vilka thought that things had been going too well up until now, but without warning, his mind moved in a strange direction. Prince Korko, he said with a look out into the central yard, would you not be interested in showing your talents to the lords? It would be a splendid chance to show your acumen. As he looked at the nameless young lord on stage recite another poem on the beauty of spring, Korko frowned. I don't like this style. It's affectatious nonsense. Right now, the empire is going through the greatest changes in a century. Its very existence is threatened. In comparison, what's the point of waxing? Let's just say lyrically, about thawing snow and blooming flowers. Prince's words are too harsh. Is the natural beauty of the earth not worthy of admiration? What could ever be greater than that? However, his eyes narrowed. It seems like Prince has his own ideas on poetry. In that case, I would love to hear some of Prince Korko's own compositions. In fact, all the lords here would be delighted. More with his eyes than his head, Korko looked back at Vilka. Not for a second would he believe that the battle-crazy lord would ever be in the mood for poetry. Maybe Vilka wanted to end Korko's visit with an awkward moment to make sure the balance between the princes was retained. Still, it would still be the fairest treatment he had received from anyone outside of his own camp so far. So Korko decided that he might as well give it a shot, eventually, maybe. I'll have to finish my obligations to the other lords first, but maybe once I'm done. Sure. This lord will anticipate Prince's splendor, Vilka said with a contented smile. Underscore 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 one. Look into the next alcove, and Korko hoped for a nuclear winter. Of course Spuria had reserved the central alcove for herself, her brother and her favorite son. Inside the space, his youngest brother wrestled some poor kid to show his might as the surrounding lords faked excitement. Looking at the boisterous scene inside was enough to drive the banquet's food back up his throat, so Korko made the wise decision to skip over his obligations in the central alcove. There was little reason to be polite with lords under firm control of House Achilia, and he wouldn't make any friends even if he went. Since the final, rightmost alcove had been left empty for the night, Korko had only one more hurdle to jump before he could bring the day to a peaceful close. Although he knew better, he hoped Amautu hadn't prepared any nasty surprises. Any attacks so far had only been warning shots, at best. Korko could feel that the worst was yet to come. Prince Korko, your dislike for Prince Pasha is understandable, but Prince Amautu has seemed quite reasonable so far, has he not? Could he not be a valuable ally? Even though the voice of Primus had come from behind his back, the prince could almost see the curiosity on his new attendant's face. I don't like Amautu any more than I like Pasha. At least Pasha I can somewhat read. Greedy and needy, it only takes 2 words to describe him. Amautu seems more dangerous to me, Korko answered without turning back. Dangerous. However, the scholars of Chutwa simply advocate an ordered society, do they not? The words were so egregious they made Korko stop in his tracks. Alarmed that his student might take the wrong path, he turned around and reprimanded Primus with a stern look. This was far too important for his ally to misunderstand, so he would have to take the time for an explanation. I've looked into the stuff the scholars preach, when I was younger, forced by my teachers. I reread some of it yesterday, just to make sure I got it right. It's not only trash, it's dangerous trash. Don't believe in their nonsense. The goal of the scholars is complete control of our society, nothing less. Anything else is a facade. That's. Primus looked hesitant. In order to convince the youngster, Korko would have to be more concrete. They order society, sure. In their writings, a stable society of peace is the ultimate goal. But to achieve that, they only ever put themselves on top, replacing the former ruling class. From what I can tell, it seems like the rest of their way is so vague that they get to interpret whatever they want out of their scriptures. You'll probably see later. I doubt we'll get through the evening without any more conflict. His attendant warned. Korko turned back towards his goal and walked into Amautu's alcove. If his brother or any of his henchmen would try to spread their crazy cult among the Medalla nobles, they would have to deal with him first. Chapter 56 Beyond the Clouds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Compared to the revelry which surrounded his younger brother, the atmosphere among Prince Amautu's entourage couldn't have been more distinct. When Corco entered the alcove, everyone in the second prince's camp sat in neat groups of 3 or 4. Across each table rang conversations, yet the quiet exchanges never left the confines of their immediate surroundings. Some guests wouldn't engage their neighbors at all and instead look outside to watch the performances on offer. Amautu himself sat not in the center of the space, but towards the back, hidden behind his followers. With the strange way the men in his surroundings were dressed, Corco assumed that many of them would be from Chutwa rather than being Medalla nobles. A table away, he spotted the Green Prince Wakoka and his sister, who should have been placed there by Spuria. Even so, Amautu ignored the presence of his prospective wife and brother. In law, too immersed in the words of a small, grey-bearded Chutwa man to his side. As Corco approached his brother's table, his presence was ignored just the same. "Brother, thank you for attending my banquet. And thank you for your congratulations. I've come to repay the favor." Unperturbed by his brother's indifference, Corco bellowed out his greetings. Amautu, his concentration broken, looked at his brother with a frown. In a public setting Prince Corco would be advised to adhere to proper etiquette. Corco's less than formal greeting did not go over well with his brother, as had the interruption it had caused. "Sorry for bursting in like that, I didn't want to interrupt anybody, but I think that between brothers, we should be able to let loose. I hate those stiff formalities. All it does is create distance. It's idiotic." Prince would do well to rethink his words. Ceremony has value inherent in itself. To abandon ceremony means to walk down the path to barbarity. The old man next to Amautu barged in on the talk between the brothers. "Prince Corco, please meet my teacher, the great scholar Iktaka." As Amautu's face lit up, the scholar offered a restrained nod in greeting. Meanwhile, Corco tried to remember what Eastern he had seen him in a different life. Iktaka's entire being screamed wise old man from the mountain. "Right. Hello. You're wrong, but it's still nice to meet you." Though the prince didn't think much of the disagreement, the table went silent for several uncomfortable seconds, as if he had announced that the sky wasn't blue. While Corco still tried to understand the overreaction, the third man at his brother's table bit back. As expected of a man who would disrespect his mother and shame his brother. There is no respect for ceremony either. You do not deserve to call yourself prince, barbarian. Considering the middle-aged man's accent and his long hair, he seemed to be from Medalla. Before, Corco had been thrown off by the white bathrobe and beard combo which was so typical of the Western scholars. Now, fellow Takeo. No need to judge too soon. Let us hear my brother out. Amautu calmed his ally. At the same time, Corco's eyes narrowed, unwilling to take abuse from some random stranger. "Are you saying I can't criticize my own younger brother when he hasn't respected his dead father in 6 months? And then mocks his death in public? Spuria Achilia is not my mother either, if you haven't realized. I have no reason to respect that woman just because she somehow sneaked a mother into her official title." Rather than rush ahead like a mad bull, Prince should have phrased his chastisement through proper etiquette. Family relations are complex, and it is often difficult to tell which acts would be appropriate where. Only through ceremony can we determine how to take action without a loss of order. When one chides a brother, one should do so in a measured fashion. If one has been determined as one's mother, one should serve them accordingly, with respect and love. If all follow ceremony, would it not create peace and harmony? After he was done with his little speech, Takeo looked over to see the old teacher nod his head again. However, Corco was eager to interrupt their little circle. Jerk. He really couldn't let their nonsense stand. "Right. So your ceremony is gonna govern every aspect of everyone's life. At that point we're nothing more than machines. I have looked into your books, you know. Some of them at least. Your view on ethics is as disgusting as it is sneaky. How surprising that a man who even failed to be admitted to a barbarian school would so confidently refute the great teachings of the ancients. When he arrived at the table, Korko had already noticed the fidgety warrior behind Amautu, just like he had noticed the little gesture his brother had given to force the man into action. Oh, is this not Quirinu di Pluritac? How surprising that Prince Amautu would let a simple warrior sit at his table, let alone a deserter. As soon as he saw the man, Primus went on the attack. Once he had heard about Fidelio's RUN.IN with his fellow warrior, the young master had insisted on a detailed description of the traitor. Rather than let his newest followers speak again, this time Amautu stepped in himself. Warrior Quirinu sits at the table on my request. This prince was interested in brother's time on the Arcavian continent. In fact, Warrior Quirinu tells illuminating tales about brother's studies abroad. He told us how brother would not be allowed entry into the foreigners' academy, for they had determined his lack of knowledge. How brother would then be forced to become servant to a lowly merchant, of all things. How he abandoned the warriors under his command to save himself. These allegations are disturbing indeed. Would you not agree, brother? An outright lie. Primus shot back. How could the word of a mere warrior weigh more heavy than the word of a prince? This prince has no reason to doubt the warrior's report. What possible reason could he have to tell lies? When Primus took another step forward, about to refute, Korko pulled him back. Throughout the conversation, a dark grin had sneaked onto Korko's face, in defiance of the utter hypocrisy before him. This one, he would handle in person. You're kidding me, right? You're talking about the warrior who was sent into exile in service of the crown prince, then betrayed that crown prince, then ran back home, got that crown prince's title and status removed by lying about the prince's death. Now he serves the second in line of succession and lives in an enormous mansion he was gifted his new master. Yes, what possible reason could he have to make sure I would never get back into power? No one can know what exactly happened abroad, so none of Prince's accusations can be confirmed. None. Really. So he doesn't live in the former great general's mansion, who happens to have been my attendant's father. So he didn't lie to the ancestral hall about my death. For a second, Korko's eye began to twitch, brought to a boil by his brother's bullshit. Now more than ever, he was determined to take everything they threw at him, and fling it right back into their faces. Of course these matters need to be determined, just like brother's status and education should. Good, then let's determine them right now. How about it? I debate your good teacher over there to see whether or not my education is sufficient. There is no need to bother teacher Iktaka with some insignificant youngster. I will debate Prince Korko, Takeo asked as he stood from his seat. Sure. Let's go with ethics and ceremony, since that's something we have already determined to disagree on. We'll have the other lords determine the winner. If I lose, my good brother will get his wish and have me admit my lack of education. If I win, I'll have you hand me the traitor, to punish appropriately. At the mention of the stakes, Quirinu's eyes went wide in panic. He knew Korko much better than anyone else on the table, so he would never believe that the first prince would make such a bet without ensured victory. With a whisper, he tried to get involved. Maybe Master Amautu should rethink. This prince agrees. Brother should use this chance and be enlightened by the wisdom of the ancients. Even so, Quirinu's attempts failed. In that case, this lord will be in your care, Takeo said, accompanied by a proper bow. Lord. Surprised by the term, Korko took a good look at his opponent for the first time. A bad feeling crept up his stomach, as if he had danced to someone else's tune the entire time. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Prince Korko. Lord Takeo Calvo Batuccio gives his greetings. As he looked over to his brother's sly grin, Korko's stomach sank. In his anger and overconfidence, he had just agreed to publicly oppose Medela as governor of the North. Underscore 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 after the foreign invasion from the north, called the Great Storm, had been held off by the nobles of Medela under the leadership of the Pluritak clan 100 years ago, the imperial court in Arguna had taken full control over the country. In order to consolidate their power, the Pluritaks installed 4 governor families to rule the 4 corners of the empire. Lord Saliena at Porcero governed the east, Lord Achilia, Spuria's brother, governed the west and Corco's uncle Sanco governed the south. At the moment, the governor of the north sat opposite of Corco. Once the debate had been announced, the young artists had been forced to free up the stage on the central court. They had been replaced by 2 simple chairs, on which sat the 2 opponents, Corco and Takeo. All eyes of the surrounding lords and ladies rested on them in anticipation, Amautu's more than anyone's. Master, was this truly wise? Quirinu's voice quivered, his eyes always focused on Corco's calm posture. In fact, I believe it was perfect. I had laid out quite the trap for my brother, but to think he would be so rattled as to jump into it all by himself. Now, once my brother shows his ignorance in public, your words will get the recognition they deserve. At that point, I can offer brother to keep quiet about his merchant past in return for his support. When we add my older brother's camp to my own forces, we can overwhelm the idiot side with ease. Not even my uncle will be able to change that. Even if he somehow manages to look good, he will still show himself in direct opposition with the governor of the empire. With both Achilia and Bertuccio as his enemies, he should realize the futility of his claim and accept my offer. A brilliant plan, master, the sweaty Quirinu said as he looked on to Governor Bertuccio who was about to finish up his opening speech. In unimpressive, but effective fashion, he had done nothing but repeat his earlier words to condemn Prince Corco's tactless actions towards his family. Would these actions not call into question one's character? For as the ancients teach, among those who are filial toward their parents and fraternal toward their brothers, those who are inclined to offend against their superiors are few indeed. Among those who are disinclined to offend against their superiors, there have never been any who are yet inclined to create disorder. The gentleman concerns himself with the root. When the root is established, the way is born. Being filial and fraternal. Is this not the root of humaneness? While the governor had gone on his ad hominem attack, Prince Corco was still seated, legs crossed and healthy arm in his lap. I didn't know I stood on trial here. Even if you question my ability to rule, subservience to others has nothing to do with being a ruler, he replied calmly. If one wishes to rule, one should first understand submission. Even the mightiest emperor was once but a simple prince. With parents, elders and siblings he was beholden to obey and honor. Without the ability to follow, how would he have the chance to rule? So you keep saying. Corco raised an eyebrow. Though after careful consideration, here is my elaborate refutation. Why though? You say that a ruler needs to learn how it feels to be ruled first. Wars for the noble seating furniture of your choice are a bloody struggle. Every single time. Wouldn't the ones who follow rules have an inherent disadvantage? So going by that logic, wouldn't the ones who do not follow the rules come out ahead more often than not? You say that being filial and fraternal is, what, the root of humaneness. Are you saying someone without parents or siblings can't be a good person? That humaneness is born only and exclusively through education. So humans are born evil. That's a bold claim to make, just like that and out of the blue. Why would I believe that? Or anyone for that matter. The wisdom of the ancients are not to be questioned. If one does not understand the ancient truths behind their words, one would simply show oneself to lack proper study. Throughout his lightning response, Governor Bertuccio smiled like a benevolent teacher, ready to educate a stubborn student. Amauta smiled with him. Things had developed just as hoped. Although Corco had retained his calm so far, his opponent didn't make it easy for him. He really didn't want to deal with Petruchio's cultist nonsense. The old governor was right just because he was old. What a ludicrous claim. As he breathed in, ready to curse up a storm again, his eyes met with the collection of lords in the alcoves around. Within the central group, Spuria laughed at her brother's comments, while both of them gave Corco a smile of pure mockery. However, hidden in the back, he found his sister's worried face as well. As Corco glanced around to the different lords in the yard, their expectant faces proved that an explosion was just what they wanted. A place of calm, huh? Corco mumbled to himself as he recounted his sister's words from before. Thus he ignored the crowd around him and looked up into the sky. Night had already set over the courtyard, and yet not a single star could. Somehow, he could feel himself look beyond lights of the banquet, the smog of the capital and the clouds in the sky, until he saw them again. The stars he had played music with back on Mount Urkina. For a while he just paused and breathed there, in his place of calm. When he looked back down to the governor of the north, only seconds had passed, but he had found his peace. With a deep voice and a worried face, the prince spoke up at last. I understand what you're trying to say. The writings of your scholars have survived millennia, so they have to contain some profound truths, that's the argument. But I never found that to be self-evident, or even true. Things don't stick around for long because they're true. Things stick around because someone values them. Like a family keepsake. Corco looked over to Petruchio, who had begun to think over his words. Happy to see his opponent follow along, he put down the next claim. The ones who value those scriptures are the scholars. Because with these texts, they can shape the rules of society however they see fit. The teachers do not shape any rules. They simply interpret the ancient writings left by the great scholars of the past, Petruchio replied. You should have read those ancient writings yourself, right? From what I can gather, they're nebulous at best. The whole thing is full of obvious contradictions. I suspect they've been set up like that on purpose. That way, the scholars can just make the scriptures mean whatever they want. How dare you slander the great way? This time, it was Petruchio's turn to lose control. Under clatter, his chair fell over backwards as he stood and pointed at Corco with trembling hands. Even then, the prince remained seated, remained calm. According to the teachings, you can't change the status you are born with, is that right? He probed. That is correct. Everything has its proper place from birth. Although he still frowned, at least Petruchio seemed receptive to arguments. It would be Corco's chance to uncover the incongruent teachings of the way. But anyone can become a scholar if he passes an examination, you're not born a scholar. How is that not a contradiction? All relationships are always reciprocal, built on a give and take, but fathers have complete, unchecked power over their sons. You should treat your ruler like you treat your father, but you should also lie for your father if he has committed a crime against his lord. As a good person, you should forgive faults and pardon crimes, and yet scholars are obligated to point out any faults and crimes they can find in their superiors. Don't those sound like contradictions to you? Although he seemed flustered, Petruchio clenched his jaws and stuck to his script. The teachings contain no contradictions for a true scholar. Only decades of careful study will reveal the truth in its entirety. If A equals 1 and A equals 3, then A equals nothing. If you have two opposing statements, you can never reconcile them, even if you spend 1,000,000 years in contemplation. That's how contradictions work. Which is convenient, because like this, scholars can interpret anything they want from within that confusing mess. If they need a 1, they can say it's 1, and if they need a 3, they can say it's 3. Why, then, would so many greats devote their lives to spread the teachings of the way? Is Prince's implication that he has more wisdom than all the greats combined? Petruchio's lips raised in a sneer of derision. As a lord of Medalla, you should already know the answer. As with so many things, the scholars don't want to educate the people. It's a power grab. No scholar would ever be interested in worldly matters like power. Is that so? Then answer me this. Who gets to interpret the emperor's actions according to the way and tell him what is just and what is not? Of course the most qualified would. As his mouth sank again, a frown spread on the Lord's face. So who is the most qualified then? The scholars are. Korko looked around the yard to let his answer sink in before he continued. In an ideal society according to the way, who is the highest social class, according to the teachings? Again, the Lord's frown deepened. It appeared that despite his poor convictions, the governor was no fool, ready to see his own faults. Right, it's the scholars again. Now you might ask. This sounds great, but how do I become a scholar? That's easy. You just passed the imperial examination. Who is in charge of the imperial examination? The scholars are. Bertuccio's deep voice rang over the yard. What do they test? For once, Korko decided to answer the more difficult question by himself. They test the students on the teachings. On whether or not they interpret them the same way as everyone else does. Even if this were true, what could be wrong about the most knowledgeable of the empire assisting the rulers in their duty? It's wrong because they don't lose anything when the country fails. If I become emperor and drive the country into the ground, I die. My whole family dies. That's the deal. So I best make sure to rule well and guarantee stability and progress. If the so-called scholars screw up, they can just blame the former emperor's lack of virtue and any new ruler will be happy to use them again to confirm his own legitimacy. Look at Chutwa. That place has not seen any progress in hundreds of years, because the scholars have cryogenically frozen that country of theirs, to make sure they can stay in charge forever. But time stops for no one. Complete standstill in a constantly moving world is a recipe for disaster. At one point, not far from now, they will be left behind by the future, and their once great empire will collapse, to make place for the next dynasty under full control of the scholars. With the governor stunned, Korko stood and moved towards the front of the stage. He would address the listeners directly. This part was for them. Earlier tonight, when I talked to Lord Vilka, I said that the empire is threatened. I don't think he believed me and I don't think most in here would. After what you have heard just now, maybe you will be more inclined to believe. A great change is coming to these parts. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. We should embrace this chance to take the best from both corners of the world. That's how I see it, and that was how my father saw it as well. 100 years ago, my great-grandfather Virabus Pluritak united the estates to fight back the foreign invaders from the north. Only united and under great sacrifice, our ancestors managed to beat back the invaders and return peace to our lands. But it came at a price. While the rest of the world has been moving, we have been holed up in our fortress, too afraid to change our ways. Now, after 100 years, others have once again come to these shores, both from the east and the west, and with them they have brought new ideas, technologies, innovations. They can be a great boon for the Medalla Empire. It is up to us to decide which of these ideas we want to adopt and which we want to repel. Yet here we sit, too busy fighting among ourselves while the greediest men from the outside have come first to take from us what they desire, be it wealth or power. While we sit, neatly split into our separate corners, they've divided up the spoils in their heads already. Now we can band together, like we once did, to oppose this conquest no less violent than the one in those days. Or we can give in to our greed, and leave our children in chains. As you ignore the plight of the country and favor your family's interests, consider this. If a hunter only looks at his own game to protect it, he might one day look up and find the entire forest burnt to the ground. The courtyard was dead quiet. Prince Korko's counterattack had finally begun. Only a frightened squeal from the left brought life back to the proceedings. When Korko followed the sound, he saw his old servant Quirinu, as he stared at him in shock. Both men knew that Korko had won the debate, and both men knew what that meant for the warrior. With a grin, Korko stepped down the stage to march towards his former follower, under an ever-growing flood of claps around him. Before he could close in on Quirinu, he was passed off by multiple lords, ready to congratulate him. All he could do was smile through their obstruction, while he watched Quirinu stumble back and flee into the depths of the mansion, followed by Amautu's men. He just hoped Amautu would prove more honorable than Pasha. Chapter 57 Stargazing Brawl. You are listening at novelfull.audio. With its dark color and confined space, the room seemed too small and uninviting to be part of an Arguna mansion. The lack of windows and the minimalist furniture, just 2 chairs and a table, only added to the gloomy mood. Among the servants, the room was called the small study, but its purpose wasn't to study. Whenever someone needed to hold a private or secret meeting, they would find their way here. I could hear the end of your speech, Lokis. It was truly inspiring, Elder Caelestis said to his grandson. It's a shame I couldn't lay out my ideas right. In full, I mean. Though I'm sure many lords wouldn't like me too much if I did, Korko replied with a crooked smile. Anyways, we didn't come here to talk about my speech. Where have you been, grandfather? I really could have used your help earlier. Right after the end of his speech, when Korko had been swamped by the other lords, Elder Caelestis had shown up and dragged Korko into this private room out of nowhere. He didn't even know what had happened with Quirinu yet, and it ate away at his patience. Still, since the old man had been suspiciously absent all evening, Korko wondered about the urgent news the old man would bring him as well. After all, on the elder's insistence, not even Primus had been allowed inside with them. I'm sorry, Lokis. I was busy in a talk with Chowpik. The Prime Minister. What happened? For a while, the elder looked down to collect himself, before he raised his head again. In that moment, for the first time since Korko could remember, the old noble truly looked his age. About your father, he whispered, about Titu. Is it true? Grandfather, what? At first Korko tried to deny his father's sorry state, but when he looked into his grandfather's eyes, he realized that the elder knew already. Caelestis wasn't here to learn anything new. He just wanted to hear the words from Korko's own mouth. Yes. It is. Father was most likely killed and his body salted and encased in wax. Tired, the old man hung his head again. I was there, you know. So many times since his death. I was there and noticed nothing. Like a fool I sat there in prayer while my son screamed at me. It's not your fault, Grandpa. When the old man looked back up, his voice and eyes had firmed up again. I want you to keep me informed on whatever you find in your investigation. We need to find who did this. Of course, Grandfather, Korko said, but why did the Prime Minister even tell you? We need more evidence before we rattle the cage. I told that old bastard to keep it to himself. Korko was getting worked up again. He knew he shouldn't have trusted the politician. Don't be too hard on Chowpik. You call him Prime Minister, but ever since Titu died the old servant hasn't been in charge of much. To find out if Titu's servants truly did take from the royal coffers, he even needed my help to get into the treasury office. He had no choice but to confide in me. He could have at least picked a better timing, Korko said, still defiant. He really could have used his grandfather's help during his first meeting with his baby brother. I screwed up with Pasha. Though not as much as that brat screwed up with me. I heard. Lady Achilia made sure to let me know as soon as I entered the courtyard. For the first time in their meeting Caelestis smiled, but his smile was tinged in sadness. I understand how you must feel, but don't be too hard on your brother. Too hard. His brows raised in shock, Korko looked up. How could his grandfather ask for leniency after Pasha had disrespected his own son like that? Under the circumstances, he could not have acted any better, I am sure. In reply to Korko's simplest of refutations, Caelestis could only offer a weak excuse. He himself seemed uncomfortable with Prince Pasha's attitude. He could have not hit my arm. He could have come meet me by himself instead of bringing some merchant foreigner and the biggest enemy of our house with him. He could have not disrespected our father. I don't think I'm being unreasonable here. He is a bit spoiled, so sometimes he acts careless, but his heart is in the right place. I can't respect a man who cannot even show the most basic respect for his family, Korko replied. His message was clear. If Pasha could not mend his ways, there was no way the two brothers could ever be allies. You know as well as me that the silver turtle cannot have been his own idea, Calestis tried again. Your brother is a bit naive at times. I'm sure someone exploited his good nature to split our family apart even further. I will speak with him and have him apologize to you right away. Then you will have a talk about the future of the empire and the future of the family. In private. We don't need to keep handling family business in front of every noble in Medalla. Can you do that for me? For a moment, Korko looked at his grandfather's exhausted face. He doubted meeting Pasha alone would help any, but he just couldn't bring himself to disappoint the old man who was already forced to fight on far too many fronts, all by himself. Sure, but he best behave until then. One more stunt like earlier and I'm done with him. A fair chance is all I ask for. Thank you, lackeys. I'm just glad this nightmare of an evening is finally over. Let's go over to my uncle and I'll declare the end of the banquet. Underscore 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 underscore. The challenger had his two fists held high to protect his stance. He would play defensive for now, and let the champion tire himself out. However, with his orthodox stance, he was an easy target for the champion's raw strength. Like an iron ram, a fist hit the challenger's stomach and made him step back to regain his composure as he lost control of his body for a split second. Once Korko and Calestis stepped back out into the courtyard, they found the third prince up on stage, engaged in a fist fight. With a dull thump, the challenger's head snapped back as Prince Pasha's violent blow hit his chin. Disoriented, the challenger stumbled backwards for a few unsteady steps before he collapsed on the ground. Maybe Pasha or his mother were trying to take away some of Korko's shine, but right after the end of the debate, Pasha had taken center stage and initiated a series of challenges to show his might, in traditional Yaku fashion. Under witness of the stars, who is man enough to face this mighty hero? After he had downed his third challenger in a row, the Pasha steadied his breath before he bellowed his provocation, sweat streaming down his chest. When he looked around for a new victim to try his hands on, he spotted Korko and Calestis move back towards the host's camp. Although the first prince had just wanted to cross the courtyard and enter his own alcove as soon as possible, his younger brother felt like he had spotted his chance to get a win over his maligned opponent. How about Prince Korko? Might he be man enough to face this hero in combat? His head turned like a sprinkler. He shouted for all to hear as he walked towards his brother in great strides. Pasha, the two of you are brothers. There is no reason to fight. With hands raised to his hip, Calestis tried to calm the third prince, but Pasha wouldn't let go. All the more reason to see in whose veins runs the blood of our heroic ancestors. Instead, he reinforced his challenge with his booming voice. You don't need to scream, little brother, I'm right here. Also, you probably forgot again, but my arm is still in a sling. How would I even fight like this? Unwilling to step down, Korko hit back. Pasha dodged both of his brother's verbal jabs and somehow even managed to increase his volume. He wanted to make sure that everyone within the courtyard would hear him. In that case, I truly cannot challenge Prince Korko for now. However, he looked around spectators, maybe to see if he had shattered any eardrums. Korko did the same and was convinced he could see the fucking popcorn in their hands as they watched the drama unfold. This hero has heard that Prince Korko has brought with him foreign warriors. What hypocrisy, after he condemned our foreign guests in such a brutal manner. Unlike with you, dear brother, they're my subordinates, not my superiors. Korko still retained a calm voice, but his words were biting. He knew what would be next. He had no interest in stopping it. In that case, Prince Korko would not mind to see the loyalty of his subordinates tested, would he? Thus, Pasha, please, in a tiny voice, Caelestis tried to step in one final time, but his plea would fall on deaf ears. No more words, Elder Caelestis. A true hero must always follow through on his decisions. And this hero has decided to challenge Prince Korko's gang of foreigners to a stargazing brawl. Underscore 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 underscore. Since no man stood above the nobles, the only way to reconcile differences, other than all-out war, was to battle in starlight, under the watchful eyes of the divines themselves. The deities would ensure that the battle was fair and just, presumably. It was such a battle Pasha had casually forced his own brother into, and it was such a battle Kalmak d'Achilia was an expert in. Just like the 100 members of his wraith troop around him, Kalmak was a warrior of the Achilia clan, specialized in stargazing brawls. A unique battle technique of House Achilia gave Kalmak and his men not only superior strength to mortals, their eyes had also become hyper-sensitive. They would see night as day. In return, they were as good as blind during the waking hours and would have to spend their days indoors. Of course, their talents not only helped during the brawls. They were also experts in scouting, ambush and assassination. Those were the types of men Pasha had borrowed from his uncle Davicius and brought to the capital. Not only that, he had also used the help of his new Arcavian friends to procure high-quality plate mail armor from the east. Though he was only able to buy 10 so far, at exorbitant prices, and their helmets were still of the open-faced Yaku style, it was still enough to equip the entire first row of his troops with this new marvel of craftsmanship. In turn, he looked over at his brother's troops and felt secure in his victory. After his grand announcement, runners had been sent out to the two camps. They had brought with them special privilege from his mother, so both troops had been allowed inside the city to hold combat in front of the Pluritak mansion. While the wraith troop of the Achilia had arrived in a timely manner, his brother's men had taken much longer to make their way through Arguna. Once he saw his opposition at last, Pasha dropped the last of his worries. The men needed torches on their march, a clear sign that they were not troops capable of night combat. Their armament also left much to be desired. Only one man wore a plate armor like his own front row, while all the others traveled a lot lighter. They carried matchlocks, but he had already seen the Eastern merchants demonstrate the fancy hand cannons before. With protection from the thick Eastern plate, it would be easy for his men to push through. The only worry for him were the long poleaxes around half the foreign warriors carried, but he was confident that his elites would crush them with their 2.1 advantage once they had broken into the enemy ranks and caused some chaos. He was convinced. Now was the time to show everyone who was truly worthy of the silver crown. Now this hero will show this dirty southerner who dare call himself prince just what kind of stone the men of Sinche are cut from. You will see my northern tigers tear apart your southern wolves. Pasha, please reconsider. You are brothers. You should support one another, Caelestis said from the side. There was no way Pasha would listen, not now that victory was almost in his grasp. This hero is no brother to some black-skinned southern wolf. We're the same damn color. Just because you powder your skin white and I don't doesn't make you the hero and me the villain. What the fuck is wrong with you? There it was again. That look from his oldest brother, as if he thought himself something better. Never would a hero accept a look of pity from someone he had left behind years ago. Now then, southerner, are you ready to get trampled? Almost. My troops still need to prepare a bit. Although Pasha was magnanimous, he remained watchful to make sure the southerner wouldn't try any sneaky tricks. Meanwhile, his brother's men positioned enormous, polished sheets of bronze, bent into a strange shape on either side of their formation. Surely, they were no use as mirrors like that. Right after, the only warrior in plate left the formation and came over, to further weaken his brother's side. Master Korko, all preparations have been completed. Well done. We can start now. Pasha was confused. He knew that the man under the helmet was the former great general's son, a formidable warrior by all accounts. You don't want your head warrior in the fight. Nah, I'll be fine. Why are you complaining when you got an advantage? Again his brother had a flippant reply, only to further enrage Pasha. Now it was time to wipe that smirk off the bastard's face. Then please, Elder Calestis, if you would do the honors. Pasha was also dissatisfied with the old man's hesitance all throughout the evening. Ever since they had come back to the capital, Pasha felt like the elder had always been on Korko's side, always speaking well of the first prince. He would show him as well. Under the gaze of the stars, lay to rest the conflict between Princes Korkapeka Titapluretak and Pakakutek Titapluretak. Let honor and blood speak the final verdict and let peace return between the lords. Why is he so calm, Pasha thought as he looked over to his brother. He must be resigned to his fate. Maybe he thinks he can convince the lords with his pretty words alone. Truly, brother has been away from Yakwalpa for far too long. With the signal given, his troops launched their imposing charge from some 300 steps away. Otherwise he would know. What the lords of Medalla really respect is strength alone. I will win them all back in one. Brother, have you ever heard of Lycopodium? What is he talking about? His thoughts interrupted. Pasha looked over to observe the brazen southerner. Lycopodium, or club moss, is an evergreen vascular plant. I think. Anyways, the spores have a very interesting property if they are lit on fire. You might want to close your eyes for this. In confusion, he watched his brother turn around and cover his eyes. Then he looked back over to his troops, now in full charge. The full force of their momentum would hit the enemy's front like a flash flood and rip apart their feeble formation. What could Samos possibly do to change that? Just as he had this thought, the armies less than 50 feet apart, a sudden flash of light engulfed the battlefield. Chapter 58 Fire Seeds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When the runner had come to inform him of the upcoming fight, Dedrick hadn't been surprised. After all, the boss had told him to be prepared. Thus, he led his men into the city, eager to prove himself. His enthusiasm had ended the moment he stepped into the dark streets of Arguna. Dedrick had thought it would be time for him and his men to prove their mettle at last, yet he had to face hostilities before he could even see his enemy. With no lights to be found within any of the houses, the so-called Silver City was a dark and dreary place, with night stretched over the complex architecture all around. From within the darkness, he could feel something gnaw at the back of his neck. Someone was hidden there, and watched their every move. Since their move out earlier, laughter had been ever present within the troop, but now it had been extinguished like the lights around them. Their march slowed, as his men huddled together in preparation of an ambush. I have a bad feeling about this, Dedrick said. No worries, Bandit. It's just scare tactics. They won't act, I can guarantee you that. As for the actual battle, your worries are even more misplaced. We have our secret weapon. After all, the rude Fidelio gave a calm riposte to Dedrick's reasonable concerns. Who's worried, you mountain giant? The mercenary barked back. Really, Dedrick wanted to share the guy's confidence, but the strange and unusual land he had been dragged into by his greed would not allow his nerves to calm. Maybe crossing the oceans for the vague promise of riches and honor hadn't been the smartest move, even if that promise had come from a man he trusted. However, thinking back to that so-called secret weapon did help ease his mood, somewhat. At first he had been confused when Fidelio had brought those sheets of metal, but Dedrick had wizened up to the plan once the giant had begun to pull the fire seeds out of their wagons. 2 days ago, Korko had ordered them to start collecting the spores from around the capital. Of course he hadn't called them fire seeds, but as usual, Dedrick had tuned out of the prince's lengthy explanation. Thus, the word fire seed stuck in his head after a spectacular first demonstration of their power. He looked forward to using them again. Underscore 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 underscore. The mountain giant had been correct. Their journey ended without interruptions. You see. What did I say? Just scare tactics, Dedrick proclaimed with confidence. Always the wise leader, he decided to ignore Fidelio's rude look from the side. As soon as they had reached their destination, they were called into action. Just as they had settled into their formation, Dedrick could see movement from their opponents. Though he said opponents, all he could see were some shadows move around in the darkness. The boss had been right. The enemy really had come prepared. All lights around the mansion had been extinguished. Only their torches formed a sea of light within a black ocean. Right, you know what to do. I'll go over to protect Lockies in case they try anything funny. Good luck, Fidelio said. Don't need it. Make sure the parabolic mirrors are pointed to the right spot and be sure the torches are close enough too. If the spores don't pass through the flame. I got it, I got it. Good lords, what is wrong with you? Get over and protect your boss. This here is my work. Let me show you how a real knight handles a war. With his last words spoken, Dedrick saw Fidelio off. As the figure of the warrior got smaller and smaller, the former knight's mouth formed into a grin all on its own. It was time to show these long-haired weirdos how they fought back in Arcavia. He organized his men to put up the 2 bronze mirrors and aimed them at around 50 feet away from his front line. The perfect distance for the matchlocks. All right, boys. You know the drill. Back 4 rows. Matchlocks. Once you see the flash, open fire. Not any sooner. Can't see anything. Too dark. Too bright. Too much smoke. Doesn't matter. There's 100 of them in that dark soup over yonder, so you're bound to hit something. And don't forget to move back after your shot. Step forward. Fire. Step right. Move back. Reload. You can count to 4. Then don't screw this up. From the distance he could hear someone recite a solemn speech in Yakua. Under the gaze of the stars, lay to rest the conflict between Princes Korkapeka Titipluritak and Pakakutek Titipluritak. Let honor and blood speak the final verdict and let peace return between the lords. The war was about to start. First 3 rows. Halberdiers. Down on your knees and make sure not one of them gets through. When they scatter from the fire. Be ready to storm on my command. Torches. Position in front of the mirrors. You're not only fuel for the fire seeds, you're also our light as we march ahead, so hold steady. Bellows.ires, push on my fire. Soundless like ghosts, their opponents rushed forward to close the distance. Once they had spanned half the field, Dedrick could finally make out their front line from the torchlight within their own formation. 2 mercenaries on each side held their torches in front of the massive mirrors to create a cone of light, focused in on an area about 50 steps away from them. They would provide the sparks to set the fire seeds alight. Dedrick felt the tension of his men rise as he focused on the wave of darkness before him. A bit closer, he heard the man to his right try to swallow down his nerves. Just a bit more, once the shadows charged into the cone of light, they turned back into humans. Those he knew how to kill. Fire. As the bellowsires pushed down on their bellows, they ignited an enormous flame in front of the mirrors. The light traveled down the cone of light and culminated in a flash which engulfed the entire enemy formation. Right after, Dedrick heard the whipping sound of the matchlocks go off, soon followed by heart-rending screams as the first salvo reached its intended target. Music to my ears, he grinned. Everything went so well, Dedrick didn't even have to do anything. After just a few salvos, the enemy had already lost all semblance of order. A second flash sealed their fate. Right flank, Skolo. Left flank Zelafries. Forward and in circle. Center after me. Box them in and wipe them out. In organized rows, the troops marched ahead. As they advanced, they stepped over dropped weapons and dead bodies. Any enemy they encountered, they would make fast work of. Held back by the spear and axe of the halberds, the thorn could cut off the life of even the armored foes. With every further step, their own torches would illuminate more of the battlefield. At last, they could see what destruction they had wrought. Pools of blood, shattered limbs and heads, men on their final breath looking up in search for salvation, as they tried to stem the tide of life which escaped their bodies through their bullet wounds, and in the center, surrounded on three sides, the last, pitiful remnants of their enemy, ripped out of the darkness. Now that he got a good look at them, they really weren't much. One by one, the wraiths started to drop their weapons. It was a flawless victory. Underscore 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 underscore. When Corco turned back around, the brawl was already decided. Still, he was glad the darkness managed to shield most of the spectacle from his view. The prince had seen his fair share of blood over the years, far more than he had ever wanted, but he still wasn't too keen on watching a massacre, even if his men were the ones to commit it. At least the end came fast. By now Dedrick's men had surrounded the last remnants of the wraith troop and began to disarm them. Corco turned his head to gloat and found his brother's entire body tense like a pulled bowstring. His widened eyes swam around the darkness around them, in search of an answer to a question he didn't understand. Corco decided to help his brother out. It isn't really tigers versus wolves, brother. It's more raven versus snake. In a slow, mechanical motion, Pakakutek, the hero without an army, turned his head to face his brother. This doesn't prove anything. It was a dirty trick. His furious roar ran across the streets and sank into the stunned crowd. Yes, a trick, Corco confirmed with a harmless smile. That's what it was. Wisdom versus slyness. Raven versus snake. That's what I said. Once they had worked through just what had happened, the audience behind them came alive and soon turned the plaza in front of the mansion into a chaotic mess. Some lords complained about Corco's trickery, some laughed at his cleverness, but most chose the easy goal and simply mocked Pasha. Even though it had been his troop, they wouldn't dare mock Lord Achilia, of course. Enraged and desperate, the hero's head swung around to Elder Caelestis, who still had his eyes focused ahead, as he watched the two troops in stunned silence. Prince Corco broke the rules of the sacred duel. He must be punished. You're kidding. What are you, 10? Grandfather, I think it's about time you declare the results. While the two boys were squabbling over their granddad's love and chaos reigned among the surrounding lords, no one had noticed the tumult on the battlefield. Kalmak, the leader of the wraiths, had retained his weapon and rushed through the open back of his remaining formation. He had been picked for this task by Lord Achilia himself. Although he had done his best, the sudden light had caught him off guard and destroyed all hopes of victory. His unarmored leg had been hit and was spewing blood like a fountain. Yet even now he could not give in to trickery. The lives of his family were on the line. If he couldn't bring victory, at least he would bring Prince Corco's head, even if it meant his death. Assassin! A scream from behind made everyone aware of the wraith's mad rush. As he closed the distance to his target, a giant of steel came forth to block his path. Quick on his feet, Kalmak raised his short battle axe to throw at Prince Corco, but the metal mountain used his massive frame to act as a shield. No way past, he would have to deal with one obstacle at a time. Come one and come all, he would make his way through. In lieu of the original throw, Cormac put weight on his front foot to bring his axe down onto the giant's neck. However, his injured leg buckled, and slowed his own attack. At the last second Cormac realized that he would be too slow, but was unable to change his fate. His axe was grabbed by the handle and he was yanked to the ground in one humorless motion by his opponent's inhuman strength. His reflexes still intact, the wraith spun around to face the attacker, but his weapon was still in the other man's hand as the giant stood above him, axe at the ready, ready to split his head. It was over. No. Once again a shout interrupted the proceedings. With large steps and bad intentions in mind, Prince Pasha came towards Fidelio. Before his idiot brother could do anything inexcusable, Corco moved between them. "And where are you going, dear brother?" There was no way he would let his brother harm one of his men. "Get out of the way, you dwarf." Pasha was about to grab his brother when he was interrupted by a shout from the back. "Prince Pasha." This time, Lord Divitius Achilia had intervened. With his uncle's shout, Pasha returned to his senses. He couldn't just attack his elder brother in front of an audience. It would spell doom for his reputation. Not even House Achilia could make him emperor then. But even if he couldn't hurt Corco, he wouldn't let the matter lie. "Southerner. Tell your dog to let my warrior go." "Are you talking about the assassin? The one who tried to kill me?" "Why would I do that?" "You have no proof." "My man did no such thing." "Really?" Corco gave his brother a dry look. "We're not gonna play," he said, she said. "Not today." "Fidelio." "Yes, master." Prince Corco, House Achilia would show great appreciation if Prince could see past our servant's mistake in the heat of battle. There was that uncomfortable grin from Divitius again. At this moment Corco knew that this man looked at him as nothing but prey. "Fuck you. What can I gain exactly?" "A stay of execution until you've killed Amautu. Southerner, let this hero warn you. If you do not release my men right now, you will shatter on the full brunt of my wrath." Prince Corco should be aware that in accordance to proper etiquette, my men are to be released at the end of the brawl, Achilia said with a coldness that made Corco shudder. "Screw this. You're not getting away with your political games. Not this time." Fidelio had already been enraged by the proceedings long ago. It all seemed so oddly familiar. Pasha and Divitius exploited the rules in shameless fashion, safe in the knowledge that only they wouldn't have to play by them. It was exactly how they had dealt with his father. He would be damned if he let the assassin go just to see him target anyone dear to him again. Before anyone could react to his declaration, he plunged down his axe and buried it deep within the wraith's face. All the surrounding lords could do was watch in shock. How dare this warrior kill a man just like that, in cold blood, and offend the most powerful house of the empire? Lord Achilia was one of the first to be released from confusion. Although the evening had been wasted, at the very least he had to regain some face for his house. "This was very unwise, Prince Corco. Today, Prince has made an enemy out of House Achilia." This was exactly why Corco had wanted Fidelio to stay away from the banquet. Keeping the assassin under lockdown was fine, but killing a disarmed warrior without a trial was a serious breach of etiquette. Of course, the prince would still side with his attendant. He knew that Fidelio had stepped over the line, but he would do everything to shield his friend. Now it was the time for damage control. "So what are you gonna do in return?" "Send one of your assassins." "I just killed all of them, so do what you want." "Oh, and since we're on the topic of killing. This whole affair just killed my mood. I'm going home." Before the volatile mood would swing against himself and his men, Corco decided to flee the premises. For now, the best move would be to gain some time and let matters blow over. As the distraught elder Caelestis watched on in silence, the lead actor of the evening banquet turned and disappeared into the darkness, his army in tow. Chapter 59. Looking back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the mirrored surface, his own face stared back at him, coated in a warm, red glow. His open, chubby features, which others had described as friendly, were anything but at the moment. Instead, a conflicted frown ruled the countenance of his mirror image. As usual, Brym's heart bled at the sight of the copper still and all those coins which could have been. He didn't even deny the usefulness of the device. After all, in the past 5 years, it had proven itself capable of creating money faster than any country's mint. Yet, it was still hard for him to see all of that good copper mistreated. "Sir Fastgrade, there's a guest." Called upon, Brym put his smile back on and turned around to face the sudden intruder. One of Dedrick's mercenary men had peeked into the room and called out to him. Alan, he remembered. Names were important. "Thank you, Alan. Tell our guest I'll be right out." Despite the importance of names, Brym didn't need to ask for his guest's identity. On principle, he would make anyone feel at home, no matter who they were. Before he had to leave, he gave the copper instrument in his front a short pat. The warmth of the still ran up his fingers and reminded him of the valuable steams inside, the ones which would make all of his agony worth it. "Work hard," he said, before he turned to leave. Out of the distillery, he crossed the backyard and the dozen or so alert guards to reach the shop in front. Once inside, he looked over the curious variety of products on display. Glass mirrors and other clear glass wares to the left, perfumes, oils, creams and soaps in the center. The counter with the store clerk was located to his right, with tinderboxes stacked up on top and bottles of brandy behind. Put together, they were his treasures, the wonders of the East. That was what he had named the shop. Busy like a bee's hive, various merchants, farmers and craftsmen walked around the store and looked for the best way to give up their coin. Although Brym would have loved to advise them personally, he still had a guest left in wait. So instead, he strode over to the counter and put on his best professional smile. "Welcome. Welcome to the wonders of the East. If it isn't noble warrior Takawis, what gives us the honor? Another gift for your wife." With open arms, Brym addressed the overweight shopkeeper who had come here from the other side of the city wall. Although it was somewhat strange that a warrior from the inner city would buy at their port-side shop rather than the one they had set up in the nobles' quarters, he decided to ignore the details. The guests had a right to privacy after all. It was not his right to force the man to decide between appeasing his wife or impressing some pretty commoner girl. "Sir Fastgrade, what a pleasure to see you again. Unfortunately, resources are a bit tight this month. I will be back again as soon as circumstances allow." "That is a shame indeed. Still, please take a look around. It never hurts to plan ahead." "I would love to. But Sir Fastgrade, I come with a message from Lord Saliena. The Lord invites Sir Fastgrade to Ciro's castle. There are matters to discuss. It would be my honor to visit Ciro's castle once again." "Zoldemir," he said as he turned on his heels to the man behind the counter, one of the long-serving members of the Fastgrade Merchant Company. "Please pack a bottle of brandy for my visit, the good one. And prepare some soap and a few quills for Sir Takawis as well. As a thank you for the message." "Yes, sir." Even though Brym didn't know why his big brother had asked him to promote soap and quills as much as possible, he was sure it would lead somewhere good. It usually did with Big Brother. Accompanied by the fat warrior, Brym stepped out into the bustling street. Though they had yet to install the glass windows and set out the displays, the congregation of curious bystanders outside the shop was as large as the eager accumulation of buyers inside. At first Lord Saliena had his men inform him that this type of shop wouldn't be suitable for the outer city, the luxurious products on offer even less so. From a moral point of view, such a show of wealth was considered indecent for a Yaku commoner, even an affront against the noble classes. However, reality would always find a way around stilted traditions. Now that Lord Saliena had a personal 20% stake in the shop, the wonders of the East had become the only place where the wealthy commoners of Porcero could spend all those coins they had accumulated over decades and centuries. Fear can bind people together for a while, but advantage is what binds them forever. Another thing Big Brother had taught him, and Big Brother was always right. While they walked along the main road of Porcero, many grateful citizens took the initiative to greet Brym. Of course, he would always be happy to reply, with names wherever he could remember them. After they had bested the slope which led up Ciro's hill, the winded turquoise spoke up in an out-of-breath voice. Please. Sir Fast Grade. Please enter. Lord Sa.Liena. Awaits. Surprised by the Lord's unusual urgency, Brym raised a single brow. Whatever Saliena wanted to discuss, it should be quite important. Still, he would find the time to show some compassion towards his guide. Thank you very much, my friend. Could you be so kind as to tell a servant to bring some water for me? The climb is considerably tiring after all. Brym's sympathetic smile was replied by a thankful nod from the fat warrior. It really is, isn't it? I will handle matters. No need to worry. Thank you. As he had done multiple times before, Brym entered into the castle proper. With the path still fresh in his mind, after all, he had been a regular guest of these walls ever since his arrival in Porcero. Brym blessed the guards and servants on his way with nods and smiles as he made his way to the governor's large study, a place for Lord Saliena to talk to guests about business. Not coincidentally, it was also the place his big brother had been to when he had committed the greatest robbery in Metala's history. Even now Lord Saliena was unaware of the value of those land deeds. Good afternoon. If you would be so kind, he said to the guard at the door. In response, the warrior knocked on the door frame to announce the arrival of the guest. Yes. Enter. Lord Saliena's shout came from inside. When he entered the large, open room, sunlight rushed in from the floor-to-ceiling window to warm his body. First, Brym glanced to the left. At the table, chair and bookshelf combination in the back, Saliena would do most of his administrative work. Today, however, the governor had taken a seat on the guest arrangement in the front of the room. Sat on the low table before the Lord, Brym found an opened letter and a tea set with a steaming pot. Fast Grade. Please come and take a seat, the kind Lord Saliena opened. Brym Fast Grade de Pluritac greets Governor Saliena. Not so formal, kid. Sit, sit. Without rising from his seat, Saliena gestured towards the chair to his opposite. Governor Saliena, this servant has brought a present, as thanks for Lord's invitation. Brym moved to his assigned seat across from the Lord and gave a light bow as he held out the brandy. 5-year storage. Their best bottle. Oh, excellent, excellent. I have awaited this with great anticipation. Shall we open the cork? With eager movements, Lord Saliena took the bottle from Brym and cradled it in his hands as he looked it over. Maybe we can do so at a later time. After all, I could smell the outstanding tea of Ciro's castle ever since I received the invitation. Tea then. Please. Please. All smiles, Lord Saliena put the bottle aside and picked up the steaming pot of tea instead. Practiced movements filled both cups before he put the pot to the side. Together, both men held up their cups and each took a deep sip. Brym produced a loud hum of satisfaction. Even though he also would rather not be inebriated during what might be an important conversation, he hadn't lied about his preference for tea. It truly was a pleasant taste. I have not heard from Master Bombasticus in a few days, the Lord opened. How has he been? Master Bombasticus is fine. Now that his duties here are complete, he boarded one of Captain Atau's ships to follow him down south. It appears we will miss him for a while, but a man of his ability will always be needed somewhere. With a simple nod, the Lord brushed over his intentions, but the flicker in his eyes still clued Brym in. He knew that Selina had offered Ronnie to enter his own retinue before, owed to the alchemist's knowledge of brandy production. And how are the shops? I have been busy with matters here in the castle and had no time to come see for myself. There has been good, steady progress. I heard that yesterday, warriors from 3 different estates have come to the inner city store to admire our wares. This time, Selina smiled in satisfaction. Surely, he could already see the revival of his city right before his eyes. As for the outer city shop, those subjects of Porcero must be desperate to spend all that silver they have been saving up. I am convinced Lord will be satisfied with the earnings at the end of the month. Brym already knew that unlike the inner city shop which would bring the eastern nobles back into Porcero, the outer city was a lot less popular with the governor of the east. Even so, he had underestimated the man's distaste for the lower classes. Rats and weasels, that's all they are. Hoarding all those treasures. Those are the rightful possessions of the great house Selina. Maybe I should just take my men and clean up some of the rabble. Clearly, I have been far too lenient. Despite the dangerous comment, Brym's smile didn't budge. This was not his first conversation with the Lord after all. By now he somewhat knew what to expect and how to answer. Rats and weasels are smart creatures after all. By the time Lord has his men together, they will have hidden their entire stash and put it out of reach. The best way to catch them would not be with hounds, but with honey. Let the wonders of the East be that honey, Lord Selina. Even when he danced on a knife's edge, Brym didn't forget to sprinkle in the brand name. Again Selina nodded his head, but his downward stare still showed his unwillingness. For now it would be best to change the subject, before Dedrick's people would be dragged into some suicidal war against the locals. In any case, surely Lord Selina did not summon me to talk about strategy. Ah, yes. I have received this from a runner just an hour ago. Ripped out of his glum and greedy mood, the Lord lifted the rolled-up paper from the table and held it up towards Brym. It is a message from the capital. It seems your lord has been quite busy these days. Has he? What has Master Corco been busy with, I wonder? Though he remained calm on the outside, he was ecstatic to hear news of his big brother. No matter what would happen from here on, he was already certain that the trip to the castle had been worth it. After the banquet and the ensuing brawl, it seems like Prince Corco and his camp spent the last several days in an effort to win various lords over for their cause. Apparently, their efforts have been quite successful. Many neutral lords have changed their weight and attitude and are now in official support of the first prince. It seems that even some lords from Prince Amauta's faction have reconsidered their stance. For a moment, Brym almost forgot where he was. Although he wanted to jump out of his seat, throw up his arms and vent the tension he had built up over the last month, to his opposite still sat the most powerful man in town, so he forced himself to remain composed. That is truly joyous news. I thank Governor Selina for the valuable information, Brym said with a light bow and deferential attitude. No need to stand on ceremony. We are not in court, Selina joked, though the message gave me a thought. Over almost a month now, our cooperation has been quite fruitful, has it not? Only for a second, Brym's sunny smile gave way to genuine shock. Before his mark could notice, he corrected his mistake. Of course. Lord has been very accommodating. Happy at the merchant's reaction, the Lord tried to look magnanimous as he continued. Unfortunately, Porcero has always been and will always be the central trading hub for all of Medalla. Therefore, it is impossible for this governor to side with Prince Corco at this time. However, I have decided to send message to the capital. Porcero will not work with that villain Vilca. It will also not participate in any attempts to obstruct Prince Corco's ascension. And should the prince be able to obtain a more stable position, Porcero will even consider joining Prince Corco's camp in the future. It really was excellent news. Of course Brym had never expected that the greedy lord would join their side right away. For now, at least he knew that his brother would have one enemy less. And who knew, winning over the lord might still be possible. When Selina had said, right away, all Brym had heard was, not enough benefits. There were many ways to rectify that. In that case, I would ask Lord Selina to open that bottle yet. It is a special occasion after all. With a satisfying pop, the cork came off the brandy. That it is, Selina said with a smile. Chapter 60 Witch Doctors Curse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The excited bustle of the street entered the room through the paper window, yet infected no one inside. From inside the strange apparatus under the opening, unknown vapors escaped and filled the air with sharp smells which tickled Primus' nose. Strange flasks and tubes bubbled and burned. Though Primus knew about the concoction brewing under the mysterious machinery, his view on the apparatus was blocked by the masked figure of the witch doctor. With a strange magic seal made from paper and an unknown blood-red root, he probed at his concoction. His shoulders tensed, Primus watched with trepidation. The brew had already failed too many times and like before, both he and his fellow assistant anticipated another explosion of curses in the laboratory. Eureka! With the witch doctor's bizarre chant, his gloved hand shot up in delight, satisfied with what he had seen in the magic seal. His brown, insectoid eyes brushed past the helpless assistants and onto his next target. Slow and deliberate hands took up his brew, before he moved past a table filled with loose stacks of paper. With tiny steps, he arrived at a bed of glimmering coals and settled the bottle atop a lattice, above the heat. His work now prepared, the witch doctor revealed his most horrific of ingredients. From a glass he procured what could only be a human finger. A shiver ran down the assistant's spine as he understood that the missing bits of skin and flesh indicated the finger's heavy use in all manner of magic. Primus watched the witch doctor take great care as he cut off part of the finger, shredded it into small pieces and dropped them inside the concoction before he began to stir with a translucent wand. Once the spell was cast, he turned and moved towards his assistants. Already used to his role, Primus handed the witch doctor a cloth. After he had taken on the tissue and taken off the amber glasses, the witch doctor returned to his human form. He once again turned into Prince Corco. With a sigh, the prince wiped the sweat off his brow and cheeks while he summarized the results of his magic. God damn, if only Ronnie could be here. Turns out, making hydrochloric acid is a lot harder than you'd think, especially if you're an amateur. Now it's done though. We just need to wait for the tissue to dissolve and we might get some answers. What answers might those be, Prince Corco? Primus asked. Well, the one about my father's cause of death, for one. But what about the treasury's sendings? Would those not be useful? Were they not meant for just this purpose? Primus looked over to the pile of documents the prince had ignored up until now. They constituted the Empire's financial reports for the past year, or at least excerpts from them. 2 days ago, they had been sent mountains worth of these things. As he looked at the young heir, Prince Corco raised a brow. As before, he voiced his dismissal towards the efforts of the royal bookkeepers. That stuff. Worthless. I expected it to be bad, but not to this extent. Someone clearly jumbled these up and made sure no one would be able to find anything. It'd be tough enough if we had more hands, but by myself this is impossible. Take all our fast-grade accountants and we could work through this mess in a month or two, but for now there's no point. That's why we'll have to get creative, he concluded as he bent down to his glass of magic brew, where the finger had begun to dissolve. But I have read stories like this about the ancient witch doctors. Although he was sure the prince would never try anything sinister, Primus was still worried to be part of some black magic ritual. Don't sweat it, kid, said the strange pale man with the golden hair to his side. Dedrick, he remembered. Though after the banquet slaughter, everyone had just called him Golden Devil. If you stick around for a bit, you'll see strange feats from the boss and his people all the time. Back in Borna he bought some old mine full of bitter salt. Had his alchemist buddy do some of his weird magic and out came the highest quality salt you'll ever see. Sold it for a pretty penny too. After a while, you'll just learn to ignore this stuff. Brought back into the talks, the crown prince looked up from his work. That's why I hired Dedrick's wolves, actually. Everyone thought there was some hidden salt deposits in the mine, so I had to make sure none of the good knights around would get together a couple of their peasants and storm the hill. Of course, there never were any deposits. Corco gave a mischievous smile. Back when we left, it didn't stop you from selling the thing like there were, did it? The devil showed a toothy grin. With a frown, the prince looked away to the side, focusing on his concoction once more. Well, there is always more important things than integrity, Corco said. We needed enough capital to kick-start not only an economy, but a revolution. When I got that letter 6 months ago, we sold all our assets overseas to buy ships and materials, but it's still not gonna be anywhere near enough. We'll have to start somewhere local, make one place all nice and tidy and then go from there. As he talked, the prince continued in his work and dropped a coiled strip of copper into the glass beaker. First you'll have to get that crown of yours, boss. Yeah. That too. Corco took a careful look at the copper before he turned around with a flippant answer. Meanwhile, Primus decided to find a distraction, before the two would start another fight. They had been doing that a lot. Still, to me this seems an awful lot like the rituals in those old stories. It truly is too fantastical. Primus wasn't very good at distractions. Talking about stories. The raven and the snake, was it? However, to the good fortune of the other two, Dedrick was a lot better at it. Eyes enlarged in surprise, Primus looked over to the mercenary. How could a foreign devil know the stories of the Yaku? I heard what the boss said to the dumb one after the battle, the devil explained with a shrug. Just wondering what that was. So what's the story? When Primus looked over to the prince, he seemed immersed in his brew once again. For now, the young master thought it prudent to give the answer himself, lest anything went awry in the final steps of the ritual. It is an old tale, about the past of our people. Back in the days of yore, our ancestors lived across the Weltalic Sea. Well, a few of them did, Corco interjected, his back still turned. But the people of the lands envied the ancestors for their strength and courage and pursued them. Overwhelmed by the enemy numbers, the ancestors were forced to leave their homely shores and find their luck across the uncrossable, unknowable waters. Because they were Arcavus fanatics, by the way. Our dudes didn't want to play along with the Arcavus bullshit and so they were squashed. Corco buzzed in again. This time, Dedrick took the bait. Just 'cause you got locked out of their fancy school doesn't make Arcavism a cult, you know. Getting kinda annoyed here. I can't see anything positive in a religion which lets you become a god. It's presumptuous. That's a good word. Presumptuous. In disbelief, Primus stared at the prince who kept mumbling the same word to himself over and over, immersed in another strange thought. Well, how about, man's potential knows no bounds? Doesn't that sound like the stuff you spout all the time? You keep degrading archivism like some warmongering cult, but at the foundation, it's a religion of peace. It's not my fault you don't get it. So that's how you describe Arcavia. A continent of peace. That's just the lords and priests being bastards as always. I never said most of the nobles aren't a bunch of power-hungry, money-grubbing leeches. But that has nothing to do with the teachings. People can believe in good things and still be bad. Most people are bastards anyways. After Dedrick's voice had turned dark, silence returned to the hall for a moment. However, even now the prince wouldn't let up. Sure. I'll give you that. Still, the whole become a god thing is way too much. Stuff like that can only ever lead to unhealthy consequences. So the ancestors. At this point, Primus had been thoroughly fed up by the constant banter. Since Lord Sicardu had gone out to convince the southern lords to switch sides and the warrior Fidelio had been sent off to do heavens knew what, he had been forced to spend several days in the company of Corco and Dedrick. They would argue over everything, and it would always devolve into drawn-out, pointless quarrels. Things wouldn't be so bad if only they would let him finish a sentence for once. With what he hoped would be an annoyed look on his face, he took a careful glance at the two squabbling friends, to assuage the effect of his little outburst. Would you please continue that story for us, Primus? Yeah, I want to know what happened with those ancestors. So, he gave the two a critical look and was gifted with a harmless smile and encouraging nod in return. The ancestors were driven from their ancestral lands and into the sea. Lost and adrift, they knew not what to do, other than follow the path the stars would show them. In the middle of the 9th night, at last, an enormous snake rose from the waves. The beast had black scales, dark as the depths of the sea, a head as large as a man, and it spoke in a human tongue. Do you wish to find the lands of silver? On his mission, this messenger will travel past them this very night. Follow along after my tale and you will find what you seek, find more than you could ever imagine. The ancestors, blind from hunger and desperation, thought themselves saved. Even when all others had lost their faith in the great Pasha, they had always stayed true to the real faith. Thus, they were convinced Pasha had sent them a messenger from the heavens to reward their stalwart nature. And so they answered the celestial messenger. Yes, O wise emissary, we will follow wherever you may lead. Right away the men grabbed the rudders and adjusted the course, determined to follow along the snake's tail, determined never to lose its sight. They were blind for they could not see the beast's sly grin and sharp eyes. Suddenly, from the sky, from within the moon, a tiny raven, feathers dark as the night sky, descended to the ocean and took seat on the ship's bow. The raven said, "Be not fooled, mortal children. Beyond here lie only cliffs, to rip the boat to pieces." The snake was angry and replied, "Nasty, envious bird. Do not rob these faithful men of their just rewards." The men felt the snake was right. How dare this little raven say they had been fooled? They were no fools, just honest men rewarded for their faith. How dare this creature slander the celestial messenger? The men began to curse the bird and threw stones to shoo it away, yet through the noise, the raven spoke again. Do you not see the beast's black scales, which reflect its black heart? If it knew of silver treasures, would it not be sparkling and resplendent? What does a beast of the sea know of the treasures of the land? The men looked at the beast and truly, its scales were black as the depths of the sea. They were angry for they had realized their mistake. The vicious snake had tricked them. They threw paddles, axes and shields, whatever they could find. The great Pakakutek, hero of the people, took out the snake's left eye with a well-placed blow, and with hisses and curses, it sank back to the depths from whence it had come. The men thanked the raven, for they had now recognized the true emissary of the heavens. They asked the bird to show them the path to their new promised lands. The raven however shook its head and spoke, "Believe the strange in desperation and you can only perish. Put trust in yourselves and put trust in the earth. So long as your faith will not break, you will find salvation." And thus the bird flew off, back to his home on the moon. The ancestors meanwhile had decided to continue along their old course, following the path of the stars. 3 days later, they would safely reach a land of abundance, their new home. Well, that was weird. The devil couldn't resist a comment. They are the words of our ancestors. How dare you, barbarian? Primus shouted. This savage had no right to judge the ancient Yaku myths. Calm down. The dimwit just doesn't get it. Calm in his voice, Prince Corco stepped in to explain the truths of the ancestors to the dull outsider. Here's the point of the story. When you're desperate, most outside help will only exploit you. Work hard by yourself and you will find success. Also, wisdom will always trump slyness. Rather than be clever and go with some mystic messenger, the men use their own wisdom and navigate by the stars. It's a good fable. Once he had explained the meaning of the tale, the prince returned to his brew, to leave his assistants with their own thought. In the meantime, he gave the strip of copper inside the flask a critical look, before he used great care and tongs to extract it from the liquid. He dropped the copper on the documents of the treasury and began to dry it. At this point, Primus really wanted to complain, but by now the atmosphere had gotten tense. Even though the two assistants didn't know what the witch doctor was doing, they felt the ritual had reached the most important, final step. No one spoke a word until the prince turned around once again. Well, this really should come as a shock, but at this point I can hardly even muster any anger, he said with a deep frown. What could it be? In confusion, Primus stared at the small silver beads formed on the copper strip. It's mercury. Quicksilver, I mean. The emperor was poisoned, the prince presented the shocking revelation in a calm voice. Impossible. Who would dare? That's what we're about to find out. Another step closer to the mysterious conclusion. But first, Corco looked out of the window, and Primus followed his view. Although they had spent the last few days holed up inside, they had more princely work to do today. According to his own estimate, it was already well past noon. We need to get going. Time for our appointment. With deft movements, the prince put away the copper in his gloves before he put on the robes hung at the door. Today, they would meet an important lord and attempt to win him over to their side. However, they would have to hurry or risk being late. Primus, you come with me. Fidelio is busy, so I'll need someone else to play assistant. Dedrick, you. Look after the stuff and make sure it all runs smoothly. See ya. With only his irresponsible words left behind, Corco stormed out of the room, Primus hard on his heels. Hey, what does that even mean? Hey, Your Highness. As the sound of the baffled and confused devil faded away behind him, a smirk of retaliation crept onto Primus' lips.